Chapter 1944, Slaying 1,000 Miles, U. 1,000 Miles is paled when he saw the fully formed magic arrays. Magic scrolls like the Magicbreaker scroll was the only way to remove the magic seal once it was complete and before its duration ended. It's over. We're doomed. When the rest of Miracle's army saw the magic barrier slowly spread out from above them, they were distraught. Thousands of abyssal monsters had already emerged from the spatial passage. They had thought it would be possible to reach the island's shores before their annihilation when there had only been several hundred, but that hope was gone. Several hundred more Miracle members had died while the army had succumbed to their despair. Players only snapped out of their daze, fleeing like madmen, when the fallen players' weapons and equipment hit the ground. Although they knew that they had no hope of surviving this, they prayed for a miracle to save them. Vice Guild Leader, what should we do? Silent March asked anxiously as she watched Miracle's Tier 2 experts fall, one after another. We're out of options now that the magic seal is complete. Have our experts bring up the rear. We're retreating, 1,000 Miles said, shaking his head. Now that the magic seal had taken shape, not even he had a countermeasure. Fortunately, he was one of Miracle's Vice Guild leaders, and his guild had allocated him plenty of life-saving tools. Unfortunately, he'd only be able to save a small number of players with the tools he had on hand. But Silent March felt her heart bleed as she watched the abyssal monsters slaughter their guild's experts in the valley. Miracle had brought more than 7,000 experts to Kama Island. This was the first time their guild had suffered such a severe loss since joining God's domain. Enough. If you don't hurry, I can't guarantee our safe escape. 1,000 Miles snapped gravely. He too was reluctant to make the decision. He was, after all, responsible for this offensive operation. He wanted nothing more than to kill Shifeng, but he understood that with Shifeng's strength and the abyssal monster's interference, slaying the swordsman was impossible. All he could do was leave this godforsaken island as quickly as possible. Understood. Silent March nodded. As Silent March began her retreat, several hundred experts formed a tight circle around her, guiding Silent March and several upper echelons out of the valley. Black Flame, just you wait. It won't be long before I pay this back tenfold. 1,000 Miles bellowed as he glared at Shifeng, already thinking of ways to deal with Zero Wing. After ensuring that his guild's upper echelons had gathered around him, 1,000 Miles retrieved a dark purple globe from his bag. Countless divine runes had been engraved on this crystal globe, the globe itself giving off waves of pressure. This globe was one of the treasures Miracle had obtained from an ancient ruin the Wind God's Orb. The Wind God's Orb was a consumable that temporarily granted players the power of the Wind God. With the Wind God's power, players could fly freely through the sky for 5 minutes. Moreover, players' flight speed would be so incredible that not even flying ships could keep up with them. Whether one was using the Wind God's Orb for escape or pursuit, the orb was a very useful tool. Unfortunately, it could only be used 10 times. Once all 10 uses had been expended, the Wind God's Orb would turn into dust. Although the magic seal on Kama Island prevented teleportation, it did not prohibit players from flying. As long as they had the power of the Wind God, they could easily shake off the abyssal monster's pursuit. Moreover, 5 minutes of flying would be more than enough to escape Kama Island. Once they were off of the island, fleeing from the abyssal monsters would be a piece of cake. After taking out the Wind God's Orb, 1,000 Miles began to chant an incantation, granting him and the others the Wind God's power. With 1,000 Miles as the center, a gigantic dark purple magic array formed on the ground, hungrily absorbing and devouring the surrounding mana. At the same time, a powerful storm enveloped 1,000 Miles and the others, preventing other players from approaching the group. The Wind God's Orb? Shifeng muttered. He could not help but feel a little astonished when he saw the dark purple globe in 1,000 Miles' hands. Miracle really is quite generous to have given him such a precious item, but you must be dreaming if you think you can escape with that. Shifeng then activated Gale Domain, transforming into a blur as he flew toward 1,000 Miles. The Wind God's Orb had been extremely famous in God's domain, a masterpiece crafted by an ancient civilization. As long as there were no magic arrays that prevented flight in an area, even Tier 5 players wouldn't stop a player endowed with the Wind God's power. Only Tier 6 players would have the ability. Hence, the Wind God's Orb had been publicly acknowledged as one of the top 10 treasures for pursuit and escape in God's domain in the past. However, the Wind God's Orb had an obvious flaw. It required a lengthy channeling time. Each endowment required roughly 15 seconds. Although Shifeng was currently around 800 yards away from Thousand Miles, he could cross the distance in less than 10 seconds with the effects of Gale Domain. Of course, Miracle's members noticed Shifeng's movement. Black Flame. Thousand Miles' rage burned even brighter when he saw Shifeng's approach. Escort team, block him with everything you've got. I'll kill him myself in a moment. He had called off the assault on Shifeng simply because he found the task troublesome. He had decided to ignore the man and let the hateful bastard live for a few more days. However, Shifeng ignored his benevolence and now targeted his life. Vice Guild Leader, rest assured we'll make sure he doesn't leave your sight. We'll show this brat just how ignorant he is. A silver-armored, middle-aged man confidently declared as he watched Shifeng's approaching figure. After saying so, the middle-aged man who led the escort team, and the team's 200-plus members vigilantly awaited Shifeng's arrival. Once the flying swordsman was within 100 yards, the escort team activated their berserk skills. A few members even activated a magic array, trapping Shifeng within a magic barrier. Shatter. When Shifeng was less than 60 yards away from Thousand Miles, he activated Power of Darkness and swung down Killing Ray. Lightning Slash. A blue lightning bolt tore through the sturdy magic barrier, and by the time Miracle's players noticed it, the bolt had pierced through Thousand Miles' body, devouring all of his HP. Chapter 1945. Miracle defeated? How is this possible? Silent March stared at Thousand Miles' empty HP bar with wide eyes, shocked. That attack had been too fast and sudden. The escort team had clearly trapped Shifeng in a magic barrier that even a Grand Lord would need some time to struggle free from, yet Shifeng had broken free and killed Thousand Miles with the same single attack. Any player capable of rising to the position of Vice Guild Leader in a superpower had more than just strong management abilities but also had enough individual strength to convince others to follow them obediently. Although Thousand Miles had been focused on activating the Wind God's Orb, landing a ranged attack should have been impossible, but Shifeng had taken advantage of the moment Thousand Miles had lowered his guard due to the magic barrier, claiming the man's life. God's Domain had many spells and skills that quickly took effect, and by the time these abilities activated, even experts would be hard-pressed to dodge them normally. Players had to predict the attack's trajectory, taking preemptive measures to dodge or block the attack. However, Shifeng's execution had been so fast that she hadn't even noticed his movements when he activated the skill. Needless to say, it would have been impossible for Thousand Miles, who had been distracted, to notice the attack. The other members around the Vice Guild Leader's corpse were just as stunned. They stared at the body with incredulous looks. Thousand Miles was one of their guild's Vice Guild Leaders. Not only was he extraordinarily powerful as an individual, but the guild had also given him plenty of treasures. Even super guilds would have a difficult time killing Thousand Miles. In fact, regardless of the several thousand abyssal monsters on Karna Island, they had never considered that the monsters might kill Thousand Miles, yet their Vice Guild Leader was dead. Moreover, Thousand Miles hadn't died at the hands of a superpower. He hadn't even died while surrounded by enemies, overwhelmed and outnumbered. Instead, a guild leader from a guild that had only recently become famous had claimed his life. If news of this spread, it would cause a sensation throughout God's Domain. Black Flame. The escort team's leader turned ashen as he shot Shifeng a glare. From today on, neither you nor Zero Wing will have a place in God's Domain. Not even the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion can protect you. Had someone from another superpower killed Thousand Miles, it would not have had much of an impact on Miracle's reputation. At most, the public would think that the offending superpower had grown stronger. However, the fact that a minor power like Zero Wing was responsible for the Vice Guild Leader's death was humiliating. If word of this got out, Miracle would become a laughingstock among the various superpowers. Others might even assume that Miracle had grown weaker, doubting its qualifications as a super-first-rate guild. If Miracle did not annihilate Zero Wing after such an insult, it would have no hope of mingling in God's Domain in the future. That's my business, Shifeng said while slashing the abyssal blade at the escort team. Lightning Edge. Countless arcs of lightning streaked toward the dazed escort members. Although a portion of the escort members had reacted to the attack quickly and dodged Lightning Edge's trajectory, the attack killed more than 70% of the team. I'll kill you. The escort leader, Nameless Hacker, gnashed his teeth in rage as he watched his teammates die. Nameless Hacker and the other survivors charged at Shifeng, killing intent flashing in their eyes. They would slay the swordsman even if they had to sacrifice their own lives. I'll support you. Silent March was just as resolved to kill Shifeng. After activating her berserk skill, she began to chant an offensive spell, aiming for the guild leader. Although Nameless Hacker was not a match for Miracle Dragon, he was a peak expert at the Void Realm. If he had 20+ melee Refinement Realm experts supporting him, not even a Domain Realm expert would dare to take him on. Furthermore, he had the support of a magical class expert, Silent March. She could make up for the melee player's flaws by launching attacks at Shifeng's blind spots, which the melee players could not reach. Die. As Nameless Hacker reached Shifeng, he raised his greatsword and executed a downward slash. The greatsword transformed into a rainbow that descended on Shifeng. As the rainbow passed, even space began to crack. At the same time, the other escort members circled to Shifeng's sides and executed their strongest skills. As they attacked, they paid no attention to defense. They were fully intent on trading blow for blow with Shifeng. Once Silent March saw Nameless Hacker use his ultimate move, she followed by releasing her channeled spell, the Tier 2 curse, Death Coffin. With Shifeng in the center, death energy filled a 30-yard radius, constantly corroding the players' lives. Silent March planned to use the escort team to buy time for death energy to detonate, killing the team and Shifeng. Meanwhile, Nameless Hacker and his comrades paid no heed to Silent March's spell. Now that 1,000 Miles was dead, they had no way to escape Karna Island before the abyssal monsters killed them in any case. They were more than willing to sacrifice themselves if it meant Shifeng's death. In response to his opponent's suicidal attacks, Shifeng used Dragon Breath and 9 Dragon Slash. He had no intention of dodging the attacks. His basic attributes were far beyond Nameless Hacker and Miracle's members. He could simply stop the attacks with brute force. Boom. The moment Dragon Breath collided with the descending rainbow, a massive explosion shook the valley. Dragon Breath shattered the rainbow and blew Nameless Hacker away. Abyssal Blade's phantoms, meanwhile, put a stop to the melee Refinement Realm expert's assault. Before the death energy Silent March had summoned could detonate, Shifeng used Instant Strike to appear before her and swung Killing Ray at the female necromancer. Although Silent March tried to block the attack with her staff, she was too late. Killing Ray shattered the magic barrier protecting Silent March and cut straight through her neck, instantly obliterating her HP. So fast. The escort team members were stunned. First 1,000 Miles had fallen. Now, even Silent March had died before the rear-line healers could do anything about it. Shifeng's attack power and attack speed were terrifying. Without Silent March's assistance, Nameless Hacker and the others were utterly helpless against Shifeng. Even though they still had their healer's support, Shifeng killed one after another. With the abyssal monster's interference, the entire escort team had been eliminated in less than 20 seconds. Seeing this, Miracle's surviving experts who had been rushing over to help, turned and fled, losing any motivation to attack Shifeng. Unfortunately, the flying abyssal monsters gave Miracle's members no opportunities to escape Karna Island. In less than 10 minutes, all of the 30,000+ players Miracle had dispatched to the island were dead. None left the island alive. Chapter 1946, Impossible Outcome. After Miracle's forces on Kama Island were annihilated, the abyssal monsters circling above began to scatter to the surrounding areas. And Shifeng couldn't be any happier to see it. Although this turn of events would be a problem for players developing in the Sea of Death, it would benefit him. The abyssal monster's presence would deter anyone from approaching Kama Island. However, the abyss passage he opened above the island was small, unlike the medium passage in the Twin Towers Kingdom. As a result, its influence would be very limited. In the continent of God's domain, abyssal monsters couldn't roam freely since they were foreign to this world. Hence, the world's power constantly suppressed them. The farther they ventured from the abyss passage, the stronger this suppression would become. With the power of a small abyss passage, the passage's range of influence was very limited. Moreover, he could only use this method to deter players once. Each ancient abyssal book could be used to open only 2 abyss passages, a medium passage and a small passage. King's Return's Hell Fiend had already opened the medium passage to deal with immortal light in the Twin Towers Kingdom, and now that Shifeng had used the remaining small passage, he'd have to make sufficient sacrifices if he wanted to use the book to open another. To open another passage, he would need to sacrifice 50,000 players for a small passage, 300,000 players for a medium passage, or 1 million players for a large passage. Capturing so many players to sacrifice would be an immensely difficult task. He might be fine if his actions went undiscovered, but once other players found proof of his wrongdoing, the consequences would be horrendous. After watching the abyssal monsters venture away from Kama Island, Feng began to loot the battlefield. Meanwhile, in the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's temporary residence on Thunder Island, Big Sis Rain, I've notified every fleet in the Sea of Death. Since we cannot command those under 9 Dragons Emperor, we only have 3 fleets heading towards Kama Island. They should arrive in half an hour at the earliest, Blue Phoenix reported. They had begun to gather their forces the moment they had heard of Miracle's interest in visiting Kama Island. However, the island was located in an extremely dangerous sea zone, and the various superpowers on Thunder Island didn't usually operate in that area. As a result, their fleets had been some distance from Kama Island when the situation had occurred, and even the closest ships would need some time before they'd arrive. Half an hour? Hopefully they'll make it in time. Phoenix Rain nodded. While half an hour wasn't very long, it wasn't very soon either. If Zero Wing acted rashly, annihilating the guild's forces would be child's play for Miracle's 30,000-strong army. However, if Zero Wing's members split up and hid, they might last for another half an hour. Just what is Zero Wing trying to do? Despite knowing that Miracle has dispatched an army of 30,000 to Kama Island, Zero Wing is insistent on clashing with Miracle. Blue Phoenix was exasperated over Feng's decision. She had the feeling that Zero Wing must have fought so many first-rate guilds that it was treating Miracle like one of those old enemies. Zero Wing only had 500 members on Kama Island. Even if these members were all a part of Zero Wing's main force, they wouldn't even serve as a warm-up for Miracle's army. After all, they were talking about 30,000 elite and expert players. Moreover, all of those players were from a veteran super-first-rate guild, not a first-rate guild. As Phoenix Rain and Blue Phoenix discussed the situation, the doors to the guild leader's office swung open and 2 people walked in. The moment these 2 people entered the office, Blue Phoenix's expression darkened. Rain, long time no see. 9 Dragons Emperor greeted Phoenix Rain with a smile after entering the room. It seems you have secured quite a harvest in the Sea of Death. You've already replaced quite a few pieces of your equipment. 9 Dragons Emperor, why are you here? Phoenix Rain responded dryly. 9 Dragons Emperor was closely tied to the ambush she had suffered on Savage God Island. If not for her lack of evidence, she would have long since reported him to the Great Pavilion Master. Just the sin of setting her up would instantly get 9 Dragons Emperor banished from the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion. Unfortunately, 9 Dragons Emperor was too clever to leave evidence. No matter how hard she searched, she couldn't find any proof. This is the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's guild residence. Is there some reason that a pavilion master such as myself cannot be here? 9 Dragons Emperor returned Phoenix Rain's question nonchalantly. Although this is the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's residence, this place is under my management. I believe you of all people understand how the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion operates. Neither pavilion is allowed to interfere with each other's work. Or do you need me to remind you of the rules? Phoenix Rain asked coldly. Fine, I won't waste words with you. I am here on official business. The Great Pavilion Master has issued an order. Since this is such a crucial moment, you're not allowed to interfere with Miracle. 9 Dragons Emperor said, chuckling. If you still don't get it, I'll explain the order in greater detail. The Great Pavilion Master had stated that you are not to interfere with the situation on Kama Island, and you must recall all of the ships you have sent. Have I made myself clear? All matters on Thunder Island are under Big Sis Rain's management. Why would the Great Pavilion Master give such a command? Blue Phoenix refused to believe a word 9 Dragons Emperor said. I knew you all would ask that. Here is the Great Pavilion Master's order. He had intended to inform you directly via call, but fearing that you would disobey, he sent me here to carry his orders out, 9 Dragons Emperor said as he playfully displayed the system message Ku Rong had sent him. How could this be? Phoenix Rain frowned when she saw the message. Our guild is in a precarious situation, and Zero Wing has made too many enemies. All of the various superpowers have expressed their opinions on the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion. After lengthy consideration, the Great Pavilion Master has decided not to interfere in the matter between Miracle and Zero Wing to avoid exposing the pavilion to even greater danger. If you refuse to follow orders, then all responsibilities on Thunder Island will be transferred to me. 9 Dragons Emperor said, smiling. Even if you sent reinforcements, it would be futile. 1,000 Miles is leading the operation personally. Zero Wing has no chance of survival. He was very pleased with Miracle's actions. Whether Phoenix Rain helped Zero Wing or not, Zero Wing would suffer severely, and Phoenix Rain would lose a powerful helper. Fortunately, this increased his chances in the next contest for Thunder Island. The naval power Zero Wing had displayed near Savage God Island had been too frightening, forcing him to take the guild seriously. But there was no need for that now. Now that Miracle had crippled Zero Wing, the latter would no longer pose a threat in the upcoming contest. Moreover, with Zero Wing's main force crippled and Ku Rong's current attitude toward the guild, he could take advantage of the situation to deal with Zero Wing's branch guild in the Black Dragon Empire. Big Sis Rain, what should we do? Blue Phoenix asked anxiously. Phoenix Rain considered the matter, her expression ugly. She hadn't expected Ku Rong to interfere. Rain, you best decide quickly. I don't have that much patience. If you can't, I'll make the decision for you, Nine Dragons Emperor threatened. The twisted expression on Phoenix Rain's face delighted him greatly. You. Phoenix Rain frowned. However, before she could say more, she received a message. It had been sent by the spy she had planted in Miracle. How is this possible? Phoenix Rain was stunned as she read the message's contents. She simply could not believe what she read. Rain, are you trying to disobey orders? Nine Dragons Emperor demanded after Phoenix Rain's long silence. Inwardly, though, he grinned ear to ear. As long as Phoenix Rain refused to obey Ku Rong's orders, he would take control of Thunder Island. It would save him a lot of effort with his future plans. Sure. Of course we'll follow orders. Phoenix Rain smiled as she glanced at Nine Dragons Emperor. Blue, notify the fleets to return immediately. Return? Blue Phoenix was confused. Are we really doing this? Nine Dragons Emperor stared at Phoenix Rain in shock. He had never expected her to be so decisive. Of course. The battle on Kama Island is already over, Phoenix Rain said. Including Thousand Miles and Miracle's other upper echelons, the 30,000-man army has been eliminated. There's no longer a need to visit the island. Chapter 1947, Bountiful Harvest. Miracle's been annihilated? Nine Dragons Emperor was dumbfounded when he heard Phoenix Rain's announcement. How can this be? Miracle wasn't an ordinary super-first-rate guild. Aside from its weaker legacy, it was stronger than some super guilds overall. Furthermore, Thousand Miles had led the operation personally. If another superpower had to face Miracle's 30,000-man army, the battle would be bitter even if the superpower thoroughly prepared, much less annihilate Miracle's forces. Annihilating Miracle's army would be far more difficult than simply defeating it. If Miracle's 30,000 players decided to scatter and flee, no power should be able to eliminate them all even if the army were badly outnumbered. How could Zero Wing possibly achieve such a feat? Big Sis Rain, are you sure? Even if Zero Wing managed to obliterate Miracle's army, Thousand Miles shouldn't have died. As one of Miracle's vice guild leaders, he should have plenty of life-saving tools on him. Killing him should be much harder than annihilating Miracle's army. How could he possibly die? Not even Blue Phoenix could believe the report. As a member of a superpower herself, she knew just how serious the various superpowers protected their upper echelons, especially their vice guild leaders. Even before God's Domain, the various superpowers guild leaders and vice guild leaders had faced assassination in other virtual reality games. This wasn't new to them. However, as the various superpowers adapted to God's Domain, they provided even better protection for their upper echelons. Take the ambush Phoenix Rain had faced on Savage God Island, for example. While Miracle might have had the ability to slay the main force members under Phoenix Rain, it hadn't been able to kill her. Had Phoenix Rain's subordinates faced annihilation, Phoenix Rain would have used the life-saving tools the guild had given her to flee the island. Of course, losing her main force members would have affected her plans. When Nine Dragons Emperor heard Blue Phoenix's question, he could not help but nod in agreement. He decided that the news must be fake. It would have already been impressive if Zero Wing's small team of 500 escaped Miracle's forces, but no matter how strong those players were, annihilating Miracle's army should have been impossible, not to mention slaying Thousand Miles. I wondered the same thing, but I've just verified the information. Miracle has issued a red annihilation order on Zero Wing. It's the highest-ranking annihilation order available in Miracle. Issuing this order means that there are no options for reconciliation between Miracle and the order's target, and only one of them will be allowed to live, Phoenix Rain said. Why would the guild issue a red annihilation order if Zero Wing didn't annihilate its army? That is a lie, right? Miracle's army had more than 400 Tier 2 experts. Such a severe loss will certainly affect Miracle's future plans. Blue Phoenix still couldn't believe the news, but faced with the facts, she had no choice but to accept it as truth. Miracle had issued the Red Annihilation Order in the past, but only when the guild had expected a decisive battle with another superpower. No matter how she looked at it, now that Miracle had used the order on Zero Wing, it must have suffered a humiliating loss against the smaller guild. Nine Dragons Emperor, what a pity. It seems that my ally is quite reliable and no longer requires my help. If you have nothing else, I must ask you to leave. Unlike you, I don't have much free time. I still have to take care of many matters on Thunder Island. Phoenix Rain smugly dismissed Nine Dragons Emperor. You? Veins bulged on Nine Dragons Emperor's forehead. After taking a moment to calm down, he sneered and said, Phoenix Rain, don't get excited so soon. Zero Wing might have gotten lucky and defeated Miracle, but you know better than I just how frightening Miracle is. Zero Wing has ignorantly pushed itself onto the path of annihilation. It won't be long before Zero Wing is thoroughly removed from God's domain. After Nine Dragons Emperor finished, he turned and left the office in a huff. Seeing Nine Dragons Emperor's frustrated expression, Phoenix Rain felt refreshed. However, she knew that Zero Wing had gotten itself into more trouble than ever before. Phoenix Rain wasn't the only one to learn of Miracle's extermination. All of the various superpowers received reports on the battle on Kama Island. Ah! Zero Wing really is impressive to cause so much damage to Miracle. Even 1,000 Miles was slain. The guild has dragged Miracle's reputation through the mud. Let's see if Miracle still dares to call itself #1 among super-first-rate guilds. I had never thought that Miracle would suffer such an upset one day. If Miracle doesn't deal with this matter properly, it will become a laughingstock in the sea of death. Zero Wing is quite powerful. With such capabilities, it should easily rank among the top 5 of up-and-coming guilds. The news of Miracle's slaughter surprised all of the various superpowers, although they also pitted Zero Wing. With how much potential Zero Wing had displayed thus far, it was guaranteed to become a super first-rate guild if given enough time. However, now that Zero Wing had provoked Miracle, the guild had no future to speak of. Had Miracle's defeat been minor, it would have, at most, sent some guild experts to harass Zero Wing. As a superpower, Miracle had a lot on its plate after all. It couldn't utilize its full strength to deal with some small guild. However, this situation was different. Not only had Zero Wing slaughtered Miracle's 30,000-strong army, but it had also killed 1,000 Miles, one of the guild's key figures. This was a great embarrassment for Miracle. If the Super First-Rate Guild didn't obliterate Zero Wing and restore its reputation, even as a superpower, it wouldn't survive long in God's domain. Meanwhile, Zero Wing, which hadn't been particularly famous in God's domain outside of Starmoon Kingdom, had become a household name. Even the kingdoms and empires far from Starmoon Kingdom now knew the name Zero Wing. Meanwhile, back on Kama Island after working tirelessly for more than 2 hours, Shifeng finally collected the items Miracle's members had dropped. Miracle had dispatched over 30,000 players to Kama Island, and over 7,000 of them were experts. The guild had also sent more than 400 Tier 2 players. One could easily imagine how powerful the dropped items were. However, Shifeng did not store everything in his bag, which only had a limited amount of space. Hence, he only stored the best items, ignoring the common weapons and equipment. Even so, he still claimed more than 7,000 items, including over 500 level 50 fine gold weapons and equipment, and over 100 level 50 dark gold items. When exploring a corner of the valley, Shifeng noticed a crimson crystal globe on the ground. Within the globe burned a golden flame, and as if the flame had a life of its own, it transformed into a small, flaming dragon as Shifeng approached. Fire Spirit! Shifeng gasped when he saw the item. Chapter 1948, Special Epic Tool. Snapping out of his daze, Shifeng stepped forward and picked up the crystal globe. Although he had seen this crystal globe at an auction during his previous life, he found it hard to believe that the item before him was the same one. He had to verify his suspicion. Sure enough, it really is a fire spirit. Miracle is amazing. It actually got its hands on this. Shifeng could not help his elation as he inspected the crimson globe. Current players should be wholly ignorant of the fire spirit. Even if they managed to find one, they wouldn't know the fire spirit's true value. Based on the fire spirit's attribute panel, it was a weak epic tool that could only cast one spell, the Tier 2 spell, Fire Spirit. When cast, the spell would summon a Tier 2 fire spirit of the same level. In other words, obtaining the epic tool only granted players one additional summoning skill. While a Tier 2 fire spirit might be of some help to Tier 1 players, it was hardly of any use to Tier 2 players and above. Moreover, each fire spirit summon cost 5 magic crystals. Although the summoned fire spirit did not have a duration, to Tier 2 players, 5 magic crystals per summon was very expensive. Moreover, the summoned Tier 2 fire spirit wasn't even stronger than the summoners. Rather than wasting 5 magic crystals to summon a meat shield, it was cheaper to party with an MT. Because of this, the various large guilds paid no attention to the fire spirit, despite being an epic tool. However, fire spirit had one passive skill called Devour Mysterious Flame, which allowed the fire spirit to absorb mysterious flames, growing stronger. Unfortunately, no guild dared to use this passive skill. Mysterious flames were incomparably precious in God's domain, helping lifestyle players increase their production success rates. Losing a Tier 1 mysterious flame might not be so painful, but only a fool would sacrifice mysterious flames at Tier 2 and above to strengthen an epic tool. Tier 2 mysterious flames were, after all, just as valuable as ordinary epic items. Sacrificing a Tier 2 mysterious flame to upgrade the fire spirit was simply unprofitable. No one knew what the fire spirit would do after devouring the flame, and on the off chance that it received a minor basic attribute boost, the sacrifice would be an utter waste. Hence, the powers that obtained a fire spirit generally considered it useless. Even worse, the fire spirit would drop upon death. If one accidentally died after expending a mysterious flame to upgrade the fire spirit, they'd die a second time from regret. However, players hadn't yet discovered the fire spirit's frightening growth rate after devouring a mysterious flame, especially a high-tiered flame. Not only would feeding the fire spirit mysterious flames increase its tier, but its life rating would also improve. One guild in the past had become incredibly famous due to the fire spirit. The guild had been Thunder Family, a first-rate guild. A super-first-rate guild had backed Thunder Family into a corner, and all of its territories save the guild's main city had been taken. Everyone had thought that the Thunder Family was finished, but the guild had summoned a fire spirit. The highest-tiered fire spirit in God's domain had only been Tier 3 back then. However, the Thunder Family had summoned a Tier 4 fire spirit. Moreover, it was an archaic species-ranked fire spirit. Fire spirits might not be as durable as ordinary monsters of the same rank and level, but as pampered children of fire, they had plenty of Tier 4 curses. A Tier 4 archaic species was already a challenge to take down, not to mention one with multiple Tier 4 curses. One could easily imagine what the influence the Thunder Family's Tier 4 fire spirit would have on a large-scale battle. In the end, Thunder Family had won the final battle at its main city. Afterward, the various major powers had paid more attention to the epic tools known as fire spirits. Although Thunder Family had remained a first-rate guild even after 10 years in God's domain, no superpower underestimated it. The guild had eventually nurtured its fire spirit to Tier 5, and its life rating had risen to Fallen Angel. It had become almost invincible among opponents of the same tier, and even Tier 6 God-ranked players had fled from one-on-one battles with the Tier 5 fire spirit, including its many Tier 5 curses. The fire spirit had become a terrifying adversary. One could say that obtaining a fire spirit was the equivalent of obtaining a capable Tier 5 helper. It was unimaginably valuable. However, nurturing a fire spirit wasn't easy. Thunder Family had practically bankrupted itself to nurture its fire spirit to Tier 5. Even superpowers had a hard time getting their hands on Tier 3 and 4 mysterious flames, and unless one obtained them in secret, countless problems would plague the player. Even so, the fire spirit was worth the cost. The fire spirit tool had another amazing aspect as well. After devouring enough mysterious flames, the tool's rank would increase. Once it became a fragmented legendary item, it would gain an additional skill called Flame Refinement. The skill could grant a maximum often players the fire spirit's flames. Naturally, the strength of these flames would depend on the fire spirit's strength. The stronger the fire spirit was, the stronger the flames would be. In the past, various superpowers and first-rate guilds would frequently rent these flames from Thunder Family, which in turn allowed the guild to make a fortune. Although Aqua and Snow failed to find any clues leading to Tier 2 and Tier 3 mysterious flames, they did obtain quite a few Tier 1 mysterious flames. I can use them to feed the fire spirit. Sherfong was quite satisfied as he gazed at the crimson globe in his hand. Tier 1 mysterious flames might not upgrade the flame spirit by much, but if it devoured enough of them, it would undergo a qualitative transformation. After Shi Feng finished organizing the loot, he returned to the cave that contained the manatite vein. He then set up an abyssal barrier and a teleportation point outside of the cave. In the future, Zero Wings members would be able to teleport directly there without worrying about the abyssal monsters. From now on, the manatite vein belonged exclusively to Zero Wing. The guild wouldn't have to worry about competition from other superpowers, and it wouldn't have to dispatch players to guard the mine. The island's abyssal monsters would serve as a natural deterrence. Following which, Shi Feng regrouped with Aqua Rose and the others, continuing to lead them deeper into the Demonkin nest, defeating one patrol squad after another. The Demonkin nest was quite large and the pathways within were incredibly complex. As a result, exploring the nest was far more difficult than Shi Feng had assumed. Guild leader, I found the nest's boss. Fire Dance excitedly announced. To mine the manatite vein, they first had to defeat the nest's guardian boss to stop the Demonkin from respawning. The Demonkin would only respawn once the guardian boss had, but the bosses based in or veins had very long respawn times. Although the guardian boss would grow stronger with each respawn, it wasn't a cause for worry since players would be much stronger by the time it did. Alright, I'll lead the team to you. Shi Feng rejoiced when he heard Fire Dance's sudden declaration. He immediately led his team to her location. However, when Shi Feng made it to the cavern, Fire Dance stood in and saw the Demonkin. He was stunned. The Demonkin was 6 meters tall and fully geared in dark gray armor. Its back was decorated with all sorts of long swords. Currently, the Demonkin stood in the middle of the cavern with its eyes shut. A tier master. Faded murals covered the cavern walls and stone pillars stood at intervals, supporting the cavern's vast ceiling. Although severely damaged, magic arrays were visible on the stone ground. Once Kola was within a certain range, the Demonkin King opened its eyes. The moment Ava's crimson eyes were revealed, Kola felt as if he had plunged into an icy hell as a chill seeped into his bones. Unlike other monsters whose auras contained death and violence, Ava's aura was calm and indifferent. Before Kola could overcome the frosty sensation, Ava moved. Unlike other monsters they had faced, Ava wasn't lightning fast. They could all follow every single movement with their eyes, but despite the several hundred yards between the boss and Kola, each of Ava's steps rapidly devoured the distance. Crap. This monster's an expert. Kola had an incredibly bad feeling as he watched Ava approach. Hurriedly he raised Titan Guard to defend himself. Dang. A crisp, metallic clang reached everyone's ears as dazzling sparks flew from Kola's Titan Guard. Kola stumbled back several steps before stabilizing himself. However, before he could catch his breath, another sword descended on him. This time, Kola instinctively raised his shield to block the attack. As they watched Kola receive a series of attacks from Ava, everyone could not help but gasp. Although Kola only lost around 13,000 HP from each attack, the tier master continued to push him back. In the battle between the expert MT and the guardian boss, Kola was at a complete disadvantage. He had no opportunities to launch a counterattack. He could only defend himself. If he diverted his focus in the slightest, Ava's blade would likely find its mark. When the rest of the 100-man team came within 100 yards of Ava, the Demonkin King bellowed with anger. Multiple Demonkin then began to rise from the ground, ranging between level 64 and 66. By the time they stopped emerging, a total of 200 Demonkin stood before the players. Among them, the weakest was a chieftain while the strongest was a lord. At first, Zero Wings members paid little attention to these monsters due to their low ranks, but after clashing with them, these expert players were stunned. These Demonkin commanded incredibly high combat standards. The weakest Demonkin could easily reach the Trial Tower's 3rd floor, while a few Lord-ranked Demonkin could reach the 5th floor, the publicly acknowledged expert standard in God's domain right now. Of course, Demonkin's attributes were already higher than players. Combined with expert combat standards, the Lord-ranked Demonkins instantly slew several Tier 2 players. Fortunately, Violet Cloud managed to rescue some of them in time, reducing the number of casualties. Thank goodness. It seems this Demonkin King is only at the late stage 5th floor standard. Defeating it shouldn't be a problem. After watching Kola fight Ava for some time, Shi Feng had a rough estimate of the Guardian boss's combat standard, and he could not help but breathe out a sigh of relief. Not all tier masters were equal. The weakest among them were close to reaching the trial tower's 6th floor, in other words the 5th floor's late stage. In a large guild, a player with such a combat standard would be considered a relatively strong expert. As for the stronger tier masters, some had even reached the Void Realm. Fortunately, Ava was one of the weakest tier masters. Had it been slightly stronger, Kola would have died instantly even if he met the attribute requirements for this raid. The only reason Ava was able to suppress Kola was its mythic ranked attributes. Although Kola's life dangled off the side of a cliff, Ava couldn't push the MT any farther. Furthermore, Kola could activate his Berserk skill to bridge the gap between them. Under Shifeng's command, Kola activated his Berserk skill, instantly decreasing the raid's difficulty. Meanwhile, with Turtledove and Yi Wumian tanking most of the mobs, the rest of the team was free to attack the Demonkin King, decimating its HP. 90%, 70%, 50%. When Ava only had 1% of its HP remaining, Shifeng activated Divine Providence and finished the Demonkin King off with Shadow Blade and Lightning Slash. As soon as the Guardian boss fell, a system notification reached everyone's ears. Chapter 1950 Demonkin King's Loot. System, congratulations. You have killed the Demonkin King Ava. Due to the Demonkin King's death, all Demonkin in the area will not respawn. System, congratulations. You have obtained the first kill on the Demonkin King Ava. Rewards doubled. Guild popularity plus 500 and humanity reputation plus 20. When they heard the system announcements, Zero Wings members cheered in joy. Now that they had killed the Demonkin King, the Manatite vein had finally come under Zero Wings' control. Their guild could now mine the vein freely. Currently, only a few superpowers had possession of or veins that produced magic crystals. Once the system notifications ended, the Demonkin King's corpse burst into countless particles of light. Items began to manifest in the air, falling to the ground one after another. These dropped items glowed with colorful lights, dazzling the watching players. By the time they stopped appearing, a small mountain had formed on the ground. As expected of the first kill reward, the loot is frightening. Shifeng was a little astonished as he gazed at the small mountain of loot. Although the Demonkin King hadn't dropped as much loot as the Void Serpent, it still surpassed ordinary mythic monsters of the same level. After Shifeng had the healers start resurrecting the dead, he began to organize the loot. As his team watched expectantly, Shifeng spent more than 20 minutes inspecting the items. The Demonkin King had dropped a total of 176 items. Although more than half consisted of materials, there were still 33 weapons and equipment, a considerable amount. As many as 17 were level 60 secret silver weapons and equipment. Level 60 secret silver equipment was better than level 55 fine gold equipment at this stage of the game. Even level 50 secret silver equipment was extremely rare among the various large guilds, let alone level 55 fine gold equipment. Without hesitation, Shifeng held an internal auction for the 17 level 60 secret silver equipment pieces. Although level 60 secret silver equipment was too high leveled for most of the players on the team, there were level reduction gemstones in the guild warehouse. They should be able to equip level 60 weapons and equipment after equipping the gemstones. Everyone on the team fervently bid for the weapons and equipment. As for the 8 level 60 fine gold and 6 level 60 dark gold weapons and equipment pieces the Demonkin King had dropped, he had no intention of distributing them via internal auction. Instead, he stored them in the guild warehouse and made them available to the guild's core members for purchase. Not only did these items cost a large number of GCPs, but players also needed to contribute sufficiently to the guild. After all, weapons and equipment of such level and rank could even tempt superpowers. He would not allow other guilds to claim the items by spending a few GCPs. The Demonkin King had also dropped 2 pieces of epic equipment, a pair of cloth armor boots and a leather armor belt. Both pieces offered excellent attributes. The boots granted magical class players a chance to reduce their spellcasting time by half, while the belt increased physique by 5% and granted players the leap skill, which gave players greater flexibility. After some consideration, Shifeng decided to give the boots to Aqua Rose and the belt to Fire Dance. Both women's combat standards ranked among the top in Zero Wing, and they could best utilize the power of these 2 epic equipment pieces. At this point, Zero Wing lacked peak experts more than anything else. Compared to the various superpowers, the guild's number of peak experts was pitiful. Moreover, as the various superpowers gathered more peak equipment, Zero Wing's attribute advantage would decrease. Hence, instead of splitting the guild's peak equipment among its many experts like the various superpowers, Zero Wing needed to concentrate its resources for greater effect. After Aqua Rose and Fire Dance equipped their new epic equipment, their basic attribute sword. Among the two, Fire Dance's current equipment lineup was simply dazzling. Fire Dance currently wore 6 pieces of epic equipment, as well as the fragmented legendary weapon, 1000 Transformations. Not even a super guild's guild leader was a match for her equipment now. Even if she encountered a superpower's apex experts, she'd have a high chance of triumphing. However, the Demonkin King's remaining items delighted Shifeng far more than the materials, weapons and equipment the boss had dropped. No matter how many Demonkin patrol squads they had killed, he hadn't been able to get his hands on the last fragment of the magic-breaking crossbow design. Fortunately, it had finally dropped from the Guardian boss, completing the design. So, this is the magic-breaking crossbow? Sure enough, its production method isn't easy. It's no wonder why only superpowers had managed to mass-produce the weapon. Shifeng could not help his excitement as he gazed at the complete design in his hands. The magic-breaking crossbow had been the perfect tool for ordinary players to combat experts in the past. Even ordinary Tier 0 players could defeat Tier 3 and 4 experts with the power of this weapon. Because of this, the various large guilds had treated it like a precious treasure. Unfortunately, the magic-breaking crossbow design was incredibly rare, and as a result, most guilds, those that hadn't acquired the design, had only amassed a small stockpile of the tool. Even Shadow had only collected around 500 crossbows after spending a long time accumulating them. Even so, a 100-man expert team that was fully equipped with magic-breaking crossbows could kill a Tier 4 player, much less 500 crossbows. The only downside to the magic-breaking crossbow was that it was a consumable item. It would disappear once its durability ran out. Hence, guilds avoided using the weapon unless they had no other choice. But now that Shifeng had the complete design, this flaw wouldn't be a problem. Although crafting the magic-breaking crossbow required very rare materials, a master engineer, a master forger and a master alchemist, these requirements weren't a problem for Zero Wing. After Shifeng stored away the magic-breaking crossbow design, he shifted his attention to a small magic crystal box. Among the items the Demonkin King had dropped, this small box's value was only second to the magic-breaking crossbow design. This item was a bloodline box, capable of randomly generating a single bloodline when opened. The bloodline this box would generate would range between basic and advanced rank. The box was no less valuable than an ordinary fragmented legendary item. Hopefully it gives me something good. Once Divine Providence's cooldown had ended, Shifeng took a deep breath and activated the godly skill. He then activated the bloodline box. Chapter 1951, Superior Vein. After Shifeng clicked to open the bloodline box, a loading bar appeared before him. Once the loading bar was full, the bloodline box slowly opened, brilliant, colorful light escaping from under the lid. The colorful glow instantly attracted the attention of Zero Wing's players. However, as their gaze rested on the strange box, an imposing aura washed over them. Despite the aura's weak pressure, the players instinctively cowered in fear and reverence. They felt like lowly ants standing before some great being. The party members only relaxed after the colorful light faded, revealing the bloodline box's bounty before Shifeng. A crystalline bottle laid inside the bloodline box, the silver liquid within radiating a cold, tranquil feeling. Curious, Shifeng inspected the bottle. He had only come across a few bloodlines in the past, so he couldn't determine what kind of bloodline the silver liquid was based on appearances alone. However, upon seeing the silver liquid's attribute panel, Shifeng was stunned. Space-time bloodline? Shifeng's hands nearly trembled as he gazed at the silver bloodline. Although he did not know much about bloodlines, he knew that those with the 3 supreme attributes, illusion, space and time, were incomparably rare in God's domain. Although the bloodline before him was only basic rank, it was far more valuable than any ordinary advanced bloodline. Space-time bloodline. Reduces all spells cast time and cooldown. Improves vitality followed by intelligence, endurance, agility and strength. Amazing. Shifeng was flabbergasted after reading the space-time bloodline's introduction. While increasing magic damage was extremely important to magical class players in God's domain, their spells cast time and cooldowns took precedence. Stronger spells had longer cast times, but enemies, be they players or monsters, wouldn't give players a lot of time to cast spells. As a result, magical class players preferred items that could reduce their cast times over items that increased magic damage. Moreover, reducing a spell's cast time would also reduce the casting difficulty, which would, in turn, increase a player's spell completion rate. Guild leader, what is that? Its aura is almost like divine might, Blackie asked curiously as he looked at the crystalline box in Shifeng's hands. It took a lot of effort for even the slightest move when subjected to that aura. Fortunately, the aura had only washed over him for several seconds. This? It's something that can guarantee expert players a straight path to the apex of God's domain. Shifeng said, chuckling. Take a look at its attributes for yourselves. Saying so, Shifeng shared the Spacetime Bloodline's attributes with Blackie, Aqua Rose, Alluring Summer and Violet Cloud. Amazing. Whoever gets this bloodline will have no trouble completing their Tier 3 promotion quest once they get that far, Aqua Rose muttered as she stared at the Spacetime Bloodline, entranced. She had never expected to find such an amazing item in God's domain. Its effects could practically rival a legacy. Alluring Summer and the others nodded in agreement. Just the basic attribute growth the bloodline granted could greatly affect the user's future. In addition, the reduced cast time and cooldowns would improve as a player reached higher levels. With this bloodline, even an ordinary magical class expert could become a peak expert with enough time. If the guild provided further resources, a somewhat talented player wouldn't have any issues reaching Tier 4 in the future. Looking at the four people before him, Shifeng could see the burning passion in their eyes. He suggested, "We can't let this bloodline just sit around. Why don't you discuss among yourselves and decide who will take this bloodline?" The Spacetime Bloodline was incomparably valuable. Regardless of which player he gave it to, they'd have no issues reaching Tier 4. Unfortunately, relying on a basic bloodline wouldn't be enough to reach Tier 5. They'd also need luck and individual strength. "I already have my Sea God's legacy. Let someone else have this bloodline," Aqua Rose said after giving the matter some thought. "I'll pass too. I'm normally busy with the guild's management. I won't be able to put this bloodline to good use," Blackie said as he swallowed his desire. He also felt that someone else should have it. "Let's give it to little sister Violet. She only has an advanced legacy. Her current equipment isn't that great either, but she has the highest combat standard among us," Alluring Summer suggested. "If Violet uses this bloodline, it'll be a great help when raiding dungeons or in PvP in the fields." "I agree," Aqua Rose said. Healers were inconspicuous to most players, but as a team commander, Aqua Rose knew how important these players were. If a team had a powerful healer, it would alleviate the pressure on the team's MTs. While Violet Cloud's current weapon and equipment were considered high quality in the various superpowers, the items weren't anything special in Zero Wing. Compared to her and Alluring Summer, Violet Cloud's equipment standard was lacking. If Violet Cloud obtained the Spacetime Bloodline, Zero Wing would have one extra peak expert it could rely on. "Since everyone has already decided, this is for you, Violet," Shifeng declared as he handed the Spacetime Bloodline to Violet Cloud. Considering his companion's points, he agreed with the wisdom of the decision. Violet Cloud, who hadn't said anything, was speechless. However, she was quite happy to receive the Spacetime Bloodline. With this, her basic attributes would no longer be so much lower than the other main force members. After dealing with the Demonkin King's loot, Shifeng had Fire Dance lead a small group of players to eliminate some of the scattered Demonkin in the nest while he led the rest of the team to take care of the remaining Demonkin patrol squads. He also had Aqua Rose survey the Manatite vein and calculate the mining volume so they could determine the suitable amount of manpower to dispatch. Although teleporting here would be convenient, each teleportation would consume a large number of magic crystals. Hence, it was best to plan properly to maximize their profits. Moreover, as it was still necessary to keep the Manatite vein a secret, it was best to inform as few players about it as possible. After about 4 hours, they finally killed the last Demonkin near the Manatite vein. In the end, many of the team's players had risen from level 57 to 58, and Aqua Rose had completed her survey of the vein. "Guild leader, we're rich," Aqua Rose excitedly announced. "Based on the information I've obtained, the various superpowers Manatite veins required between 1,500 and 2,000 players to mine at maximum efficiency, and their chances of obtaining magic crystals are between 5% to 7%. Meanwhile, after our experiments, we'll only need around 1,600 people to mine at maximum efficiency, but we'll have a 7% to 9% chance of obtaining magic crystals. Our vein is almost a superior vein. Alright, dispatch players to mine this vein immediately," I'll leave the management to you. Keep the vein confidential, Shifeng said, nodding. This outcome didn't particularly surprise him. He had long since known that Kama Island's manatite vein was a superior vein. Otherwise he wouldn't have chosen to capture it first. Also, guild leader, I received a message from the secret pavilion some time ago, stating that Miracle has issued a red annihilation order on Zero Wing. Moreover, Miracle has secretly dispatched a large number of experts to the Black Dragon Empire. The guild likely plans to attack our branch guild members, Aqua Rose said worriedly. They have trouble striking us in Starmoon Kingdom, so they're starting with the Black Dragon Empire? Shifeng chuckled. He then said, Alright, I got it for now, just focus on the manatite vein. I'll prove to Miracle that Zero Wing isn't just unshakable in Starmoon Kingdom, but in the Black Dragon Empire as well. Chapter 1952, Dark Tidings. Black Dragon Empire, Lake Heart City. Due to the teleportation gate to the Ice Crystal World, Lake Heart City had become one of the most popular cities in the Black Dragon Empire. A flood of players visited the city each day to travel to the Ice Crystal World and obtain its unique resources. Moreover, it was much faster to level in the Ice Crystal World than on the continent of God's domain. Even adventurer teams eagerly rushed to the new otherworld, not to mention the various large guilds. Meanwhile, Nine Dragons Emperor sat by a window in a high-class restaurant not far from the teleportation plaza, quietly watching the teleportation gate with a grin. Suddenly, a tall, muscular man approached with hurried steps. He was none other than Blood Dragon, the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's branch guild leader in the Black Dragon Empire. Pavilion Master, good news? I've discussed the situation with Miracle. As long as we provide information about the Zero Wing members in Lake Heart City, Miracle will take care of everything. Once the matter has been dealt with, we will secure Zero Wing's possessions in the Empire, Blood Dragon respectfully reported. Miracle sure moves quickly. Nine Dragons Emperor smiled upon hearing Blood Dragon's report. I knew Miracle wouldn't let things slide. I had planned to remove Zero Wing from Lake Heart City quietly, but now I won't have to put in the effort. Based on the information I've received, Miracle has dispatched at least 20,000 expert members and 80,000 elite members, Blood Dragon said. To ensure the total annihilation of Zero Wing's branch in the Empire, Miracle's elders have decided to send their first vice-guild leader to command the battle. By the looks of it, Miracle plans to end the battle swiftly, restoring the guild's reputation as quickly as possible. They've even sent Shredded Soul? Nine Dragons Emperor was slightly surprised by the news. He had only met Shredded Soul a few times, but almost everyone in the virtual gaming world knew about the man. One could say that he was a mythical figure. Since his rise, Shredded Soul had been responsible for numerous, miraculous feats. He was no doubt the most capable subordinate under Miracle's guild leader. Some time ago, Shredded Soul had led Miracle's forces in a victory over a super guild on the western continent of God's domain, and occupied a neutral city. This incident had caused a huge sensation among the various superpowers and was the reason that Ku Rong, the great pavilion master, wanted to avoid a conflict with Miracle. Miracle was simply too strong. If not for its lacking legacy, it would have already been crowned as a super guild. The fact that Miracle had sent Shredded Soul was utterly unexpected. They didn't only send Shredded Soul. To put a swift end to Zero Wing, Miracle also dispatched 12 of its guild elders. Zero Wing's doom is assured, Blood Dragon said. Those capable of rising to the position of elder in a superpower had a list of impressive achievements in the virtual gaming world. They also had to display certain individual combat standards. Without sufficient strength, after all, no one would listen to their commands. In Miracle, a player had to reach the Void Realm at the very least to become an elder. Since Miracle had dispatched so many experts, the guild had certainly prepared plenty of trump cards as well. It was clear how furious the guild was with Zero Wing. Good. Keep an eye on Zero Wing's people. Notify Miracle the moment you notice any changes, Nine Dragons Emperor instructed, smirking as he watched the numerous Zero Wing members on the street outside. I had thought of involving Beast Emperor, but it seems that won't be necessary. Meanwhile, in Starmoon Kingdom's Zero Wing City, after Shifeng had assigned Aqua Rose her tasks, he used a return scroll to teleport to Zero Wing City. As soon as he exited the guild residence, he could tell that the city's player population had slightly decreased. The city wasn't as lively as it had been during his previous visit, and there were far fewer guild players in the city. When Shifeng reached the candlelight trading firm, he noticed that the shop's business had slowed considerably as well. Guild leader, you're back. When Melancholic Smile noticed Feng enter the shop, she hurriedly reported, "The invites we've sent to the various corporations have all been returned. Even some of the corporations that had previously expressed interest in our auction have lost interest. They've declared that they are only willing to purchase Zero Wing City's virtual stores." None of them are willing to rent? Feng was surprised by the news. Has something happened in Witch's Hill? 3 hours ago, 2 guilds established towns in the area. Although both are only basic towns, they have received support from the kingdom's various large guilds. All of these guilds intend to share responsibility for the 2 towns' development. Moreover, both towns are selling a large number of virtual stores and are currently negotiating with the various corporations, Melancholic Smile said, nodding. Based on our investigations, a few major corporations and first-rate guilds have expressed interest and plan to invest in the towns as well. If they reach an agreement, it will severely affect Zero Wing City's development. Why don't we sell a small number of our virtual stores, guild leader? We've recently moved to a new training ground, and we have to spend a lot of money on multiple aspects. With our current daily income, we can't afford to support the training ground. Not bad. They actually set up towns in Witch's Hill so soon. Feng chuckled. Don't worry about selling the virtual stores for now. If we really need credits, you can sell some of Candlelight's lower quality weapons and equipment. Sell them in batches and don't reduce the price too much. We'll store the higher quality items in the guild warehouse. After saying so, Feng transferred all the weapons and equipment he had looted from Miracle's members to Melancholic Smile. When Melancholic Smile saw the items, she was dumbfounded. Of the 7,000 plus weapons and equipment Feng had just given her, even the most inferior was level 50 secret silver equipment. Although mainstream players had already reached level 50 equipment was still difficult to come by, especially for secret silver rank and above. Even if she only sold 1,000 pieces of level 50 secret silver equipment, she'd earn enough credits to sustain the guild for quite some time. After all, many players in the various large guilds in particular, preferred to purchase items with credits, rather than spend their coins. Guild leader, I can really sell these items? Melancholic Smile asked. Normally, Feng objected to selling God's domain's resources for credits more than anyone. Doing so was putting the cart before the horse after all, yet Feng actually wanted her to convert so many important items into credits. Do it. Just make sure that you don't sell them for too cheap, Feng said, chuckling as he shooed Melancholic Smile away. Normally, he wouldn't agree to something like this since Zero Wing needed resources, but since the guild had secured the Manatite vein, things had changed. Moreover, while level 50 secret silver weapons and equipment were precious right now, after a little more time they wouldn't be. Rather than wait for these items to depreciate, selling them for credits to sustain the new training ground was a wiser option. Once she had Feng's confirmation, Melancholic Smile left excitedly with the weapons and equipment. She then sorted the items and selected those with inferior attributes to sell in the Candlelight trading firm's various branches. However, these items would cost credits, not coins. Chapter 1953, How Dare They? Zero Wing City, Candlelight Trading Firm's first floor hall. Although many of the guild players that had resided in Zero Wing City had shifted their operations to the new guild towns in the Witch's Hill, the city was still independent players' first choice when visiting the area. The 2 guild towns weren't a match for the city's level of convenience or its wonderful environment. While players browsed the merchandise in the first floor hall, a new counter appeared. According to the sign hovering above the counter, it offered weapons and equipment in exchange for credits. In NPC city shops, items could only be purchased with coins or traded for certain special items, such as magic crystals. There was no function that allowed players to purchase items with credits. However, guild towns and cities were a different story. The owner could freely determine what currency they'd accept. The new counter attracted the attention of every player in the hall the moment it appeared. What's going on? Candlelight is selling weapons and equipment for credits? They're not garbage weapons and equipment, are they? I doubted who would buy them if they were trash. I bet that they're ordinary weapons and equipment. After all, Candlelight is Starmoon Kingdom's #1 trading firm, and multiple lifestyle masters work for the firm. The new items are probably these masters' failed products. Even so, it's better than nothing. I have wanted to replace my level 45 equipment for a while now. However, I don't even have enough coins to buy a piece of ordinary level 50 equipment. Indeed. If Candlelight's asking price isn't too high, I might buy a few pieces for myself. Everyone quietly discussed the new counter. Many among them had already approached out of curiosity. They wanted to know what kind of weapons and equipment Zero Wing was trying to sell. Several dozen level 50 weapons and equipment had been laid out on the counter, and every one of them gave off the glow unique to secret silver items. The dazzling sight dumbfounded the players that investigated the counter. What's going on? These are level 50 secret silver weapons and equipment. Am I hallucinating? Did Zero Wing make a mistake when it set the currency requirement? Even large guilds' internal members have a hard time obtaining a piece of level 50 secret silver equipment, yet Zero Wing is selling them? And they're only selling the pieces for credits. Amazing. Scram. I was here first. I'm buying 5 pieces. I want 10. The players that had only planned to window shop went into a frenzy. Regardless of whether they could use these weapons and equipment right now, they intended to buy as much as they could. Each piece of equipment only sold for a few thousand credits, while the weapons sold for over 10,000 credits. It was much easier to buy these items with credits than with coins. Relatively well-off players in particular immediately purchased an entire set. In the end, it took less than 3 minutes for the 100+ secret silver weapons and equipment to sell out, and Zero Wing instantly earned over 600,000 credits. Crap. They've already sold out? I knew I shouldn't have hesitated and bought more. I could have made a small profit by reselling them. The moment the weapons and equipment sold out, many of the independent players who had hesitated regretted their decision. They hated themselves for acting quicker. However, after another 10 or so minutes, another batch of weapons and equipment appeared on the counter. Like the first batch, every piece was level 50 secret silver rank. Is Zero Wing insane? It's selling more? Out of the way. I'm going to buy as many as I can this time. Upon seeing the new batch of weapons and equipment, the independent players' eyes turned bloodshot as they charged over to the counter. This time the items sold out in less than a minute. Meanwhile, news of the Candlelight trading firm's level 50 secret silver weapons and equipment quickly spread, shocking many powers. What's going on? Our guild has had a massive headache over acquiring more level 50 secret silver equipment, yet Zero Wing is selling such items in large quantities? Is Zero Wing going to disband soon? Is Zero Wing's warehouse overflowing with these items? Quick! Send someone to camp the Candlelight trading firm. As long as Zero Wing sells these weapons and equipment for credits, buy as many as you can. Although the various large guilds had already raided level 50 100-man team dungeons, they had been limited to normal mode. None of them had any progress in hard or hell mode. Only the various superpowers had the power to challenge these modes. Hence, level 50 top-tier weapons and equipment were still extremely rare. Normally, players could only obtain such items by defeating field bosses or completing high-difficulty quests. At this point, the various superpowers didn't even have enough level 50 secret silver weapons and equipment to gear their expert players fully. Yet, Zero Wing had so many of these items that they were selling them so cheaply to the public. However, while most of the various large guilds assumed that was the case, the various superpowers knew otherwise. Zero Wing was simply offloading the loot it had taken from Miracle. News of the battle between the two guilds had only reached the various superpowers thus far. Most first-rate guilds had no idea of the incident, let alone those weaker than first-rate guilds. Black Dragon Empire, in one of Lake Heart City's high-class restaurants. Uncle Yuan, is this Zero Wing's way of complaining that Miracle isn't killing it fast enough? Purple Jade was astounded when she read the latest report. Even newly formed superpowers would not dare to provoke Miracle to such an extent, yet Zero Wing was so bold as to throw fuel on the fire. I don't know, but based on my understanding of Shredded Soul, he won't let Zero Wing get away with this. He'll employ the most ruthless methods to deal with the guild, Yuan Tiexin said, chuckling. However, this has definitely made our trip here worthwhile. Even if we don't see Miracle's true strength, we should at least witness 3/4 of it. They had come to Lake Heart City to investigate Miracle's power. This was only the 3rd time Miracle had launched such a major assault on another guild, and every major operation was a golden opportunity to investigate a guild's strength. Meanwhile, inside Miracle's temporary residence in Lake Heart City, Miracle's upper echelons and durs currently filled the residence's spacious meeting room. However, the room was deathly silent as everyone focused on an emaciated, middle-aged man. Although he appeared frail, none in the virtual gaming world dared to look down on this man. He was Miracle's first vice guild leader, Shredded Soul. Damn it. Damn Zero Wing. How dare they? I will tear their corpses to shreds. Thousand Miles's expression had twisted in an ugly mask as he read the latest report on the enemy guild. Zero Wing? A cold glint flashed in Shredded Soul's eyes as he read the report. How courageous. They dare to sell our items so openly. It seems it has been so long since Miracle has taken action in the Eastern continent that even an upstart guild dares to look down on us. If any of Miracle's members find Zero Wings outside of an NPC town or city, regardless of their rank in the guild, they are to kill them all on sight. Chapter 1954, Basic Combat Devices Affect Starmoon Kingdom, Zero Wing City. As the crowd in the candlelight trading firm cheered the level 50 secret silver equipment sales, a disturbance occurred among Zero Wing's internal members. There hadn't been much level 50 secret silver or fine gold equipment in Zero Wing's guild warehouse, but suddenly, a massive stockpile had appeared. There were even plenty of level 50 dark gold weapons and equipment now, tempting many of the guild's internal members. They too went into a frenzy to purchase the new items. Level 50 secret silver equipment wasn't very difficult to obtain for Zero Wings members since the guild's various raid teams returned with some of these items from time to time. However, level 50 fine gold and dark gold equipment was a different story. Many of the guild's tier 2 experts didn't even have full sets of such equipment. Many guild members chose to convert their rare materials into GCPs to purchase the new equipment, which not only increased the guild's material stockpile, but also increased the overall strength of these guild members. At this point, Shifeng had arrived at the candlelight trading firm. He immediately headed to his exclusive special forging room and was greeted by the sight of various rare materials, all of which he had instructed Melancholic Smile to prepare. He then dived into crafting the basic combat device. Shifeng was very familiar with the combat device's power. Although the design he had obtained was only for the basic combat device, the basic version was most suitable for current players. Even an ordinary player could become as strong as an ordinary expert after equipping the basic combat device, and if given to ordinary expert players, they wouldn't be far from rivaling peak experts, if at all. The basic combat device was what Zero Wing needed most right now. If he could mass-produce the device, he could mostly solve the issue regarding Zero Wing's weak foundation and expand the guild significantly in a short time. As for the magic-breaking crossbow, he had left the tool's production to Cream Coco and her comrades. After all, he was Zero Wing's guild leader. He had a long list of duties each day, and he simply didn't have the time to stay cooped up in his forging room. He only forged the basic combat device personally because the design was bound to him. Dense mana filled the quiet special forging room. Using the Philosopher's Stone, Shifeng began to synthesize one mana stone after another. He then collected the necessary materials and began his first attempt at crafting the basic combat device. Smelting, extracting, engraving. Before 5 minutes had passed, a Rubik's Cube made of pitch-black iron took shape before Shifeng. Since this was the first time he had crafted a basic combat device, Shifeng couldn't help his growing nerves as he waited for the system to appraise the iron cube. The basic combat device was a special tool that only basic master forgers or above could produce. Moreover, the tool was quite difficult to craft. Even a basic master forger would not have more than a 50% production success rate. Once the loading bar was full, a melodious sound echoed throughout the forging room. System: basic combat device has been successfully manufactured. Forging proficiency increased by 5 points. Obtained 274,000 EXP. So, this is the Divine Library's basic combat device? Shifeng stared at the basic combat device's attributes in astonishment. Basic combat device. Increases the life rating of players at tier 3 or below by 1 grade in skill and spell completion rates by 2% for 12 hours. He had already known that the combat device increased its user's life rating, but he hadn't expected this device to increase skill and spell completion rates as well. In the past, the basic combat devices he had obtained from ancient ruins had provided additional defense. At most, though he had never found one, he had heard that the more powerful devices increased attack power or movement speed, but the basic combat device he had just forged actually increased skill and spell completion rates. This bonus attribute was far more valuable than any of the bonuses he had heard of in the past. In God's domain, the higher one's skill or spell completion rate was, the more power they'd exhibit with their skills or spells. This was one of the major factors that differentiated players. The difference between a skill with 90% completion rate and 100% was massive. This improvement was particularly useful in PvP, in which players usually fought at top speed, especially experts. Even a split-second difference could decide a battle's outcome. Having a completion rate boost would increase skills and spells tolerance, and players' execution wouldn't have to be as precise to get the same results. Excited, Shi Feng immediately began to forge more basic combat devices. After crafting nearly 20 basic combat devices, Shi Feng received an unexpected call from Gentle Snow. Guild leader, the situation in Lakeheart City has changed. A large number of experts have suddenly arrived and started hunting our guild members in the fields. Over 500 of our players have already died, Gentle Snow reported, her head aching slightly. All of these ambushing players have very high combat standards, and although I've sent teams to deal with them, they've turned the tables on our members. Miracle can't sit still any longer, huh? Giving the matter some thought and considering the previous reports, he assumed these players were from Miracle. Only he hadn't expected the guild to act so soon. Do you know how many people they have? We've confirmed around 50,000 enemies, Gentle Snow replied weakly. Although Zero Wing's development in the Black Dragon Empire had been progressing smoothly, the branch guild did not have many expert and elite members. Overall, there were a little over 2,000 experts and 90,000 elite members. Moreover, the majority of the expert players were her subordinates from Ouroboros. They sure mobilized their forces quickly. The number surprised Shi Feng slightly. After the battle on Kama Island, he knew that Miracle wouldn't let him or Zero Wing get away unscathed, but he had thought that it would take the guild some time to muster a large force after so many of its expert and elite members had died. He had never thought that Miracle could gather 50,000 players in so little time. He truly hadn't expected this situation. He had thought that Miracle would at most transfer a little over 10,000 players to the Black Dragon Empire to harass Zero Wing. Transferring more than that would leave Miracle's other territories undefended. If Miracle weren't careful, it could easily be ambushed by other powers. Guild leader, what should we do? Gentle Snow asked. Do we fight? Fighting Miracle's 50,000 strong army directly would incur serious losses for Zero Wing. Depending on the severity, the guild's development might even grind to a halt. However, if they avoided fights with Miracle's forces, the enemy guild would continue to ambush Zero Wing's teams. The guild couldn't afford that either. Of course we're fighting. Moreover, we have a big surprise for Miracle. Shi Feng said, smiling faintly as he thought about the basic combat devices he had just completed. Chapter 1955, Foothold. A surprise? Gentle Snow watched Shi Feng on the screen in confusion. Naturally, she welcomed the confrontation with Miracle, but it was a very powerful super-first-rate guild. Moreover, based on Miracle's reaction, the guild seemed quite intent on Zero Wing's destruction. Defeating their 50,000-man army wouldn't be easy. There was also a huge difference between the number of experts in Zero Wing and those in Miracle. MHM. In a moment, I want you to visit Zero Wing City's candlelight trading firm. I've got something good for you, Shi Feng said, nodding. If this had happened before he had obtained the basic combat device design, he wouldn't have dared to drop all pretenses with Miracle on Kama Island. Any superpower was terrifying once it got serious after all. He had watched superpowers slaughter many large guilds in the past, including plenty of first-rate guilds. Top-ranked first-rate guilds might put up a fight against super-first-rate guilds and super guilds normally, but in a serious confrontation, they had no hope of surviving. Alright, I'll head there now. Seeing Shi Feng's solemn expression, Gentle Snow understood that the item he spoke of was immensely important. Otherwise, he wouldn't have told her to make the trip personally. After Gentle Snow disconnected the call, she took out a guild transfer scroll and teleported to Zero Wing City's residence. She then donned a black cloak and made her way toward the candlelight trading firm. Candlelight trading firm, Shi Feng's special forging room. As Gentle Snow entered the workshop, she could feel the strange mana in the room. It felt particularly violent. Logically, players should feel clear-headed in places with high mana density, but she felt her blood boil and her heart pound as she entered the room. What are these? Gentle Snow asked as she around the room at the pitch-black Rubik's cubes. She could sense that these cubes were the cause of the strange mana. These are basic combat devices and the items I wanted to give you, Shi Feng, who was in the midst of forging another basic combat device, explained as he stopped his work. The magic arrays engraved on the basic combat devices were extraordinary, capable of changing the nature of mana. If he hadn't been an advanced magician, he wouldn't have been able to complete the devices. Despite their passive state, the basic combat devices were still effective. Even though the effects were much weaker in this state, they changed the room's mana as the pile of cubes increased. Basic combat device? This was the first time Gentle Snow had heard of this item. You'll know once you inspect them, Shifeng said as he traded one of the completed devices to Gentle Snow. Outsiders couldn't inspect or take items in a workshop in God's domain to prevent theft. After all, the materials within workshops were extremely valuable. Gentle Snow was dazed as she inspected the basic combat device's attributes. Not only could one of these devices increase a player's life rating by 1 grade, but it could also increase skill and spell completion rates. She had never heard of such a tool. The various powers had already investigated the life rating feature and understood its implications. After equipping the basic combat device, players would become boss-like existences among their peers. They'd receive an overall increase to their strength. Guild leader, are all of these cubes the same? Gentle Snow could not help but ask, shocked as she surveyed the pitch-black Rubik's cubes around the room. Although Shifeng had said as much, she needed confirmation. The revelation was just too shocking. Most tools that increased players' combat power only improved one or several aspects. Take a tool that increased players' strength, for example. The strength boost might increase a player's combat power, but if the player couldn't land an attack, it would be meaningless. Unlike most tools that increased combat power, the basic combat devices increased their user's life rating, which was far more effective than increasing several attributes. A life rating boost wouldn't just improve a player's basic attributes, but it would also sharpen players' 5 senses and qualitatively transform their physique. With such an overall boost, players could better exhibit their combat power. Gentle Snow couldn't believe that so many of these valuable items existed. Not all of them are the same. Pointing at the 2 Rubik's cubes on his work table, Shifeng said, "These 2 are strengthened basic combat devices. Although there's no change to life rating, it provides an additional 10% to physique. It will help players better exhibit their combat power." These 2 strengthened versions were a result of his Black Steel Insignia's effect, which improved an item's attributes by a fixed percentage. 10% to physique? Gentle Snow gaped at the items. Basic combat device was already impressively powerful, yet there were strengthened versions of it as well. While a 10% boost to physique might not seem like much, it significantly increased a player's actual combat power. "I have only started production. Take these and use them for now. It's best if you let the guild's Tier 2 experts test them," Shifeng said as he traded the 22 basic combat devices and strengthened basic combat devices to Gentle Snow. "I'll deliver more basic combat devices later. However, do not engage Miracle in any large-scale fights before you get the next delivery." Although he wanted to use the Hell tanks, they were necessary to fend off Beast Emperor and Blackwater. If they found out that the Hell tanks had been moved to the Black Dragon Empire, they'd take advantage of the opportunity to strike at Zero Wing's territory. The best he could do was rely on the basic combat devices. "I understand." Gentle Snow nodded. Thus far, Zero Wing's forces had used guerrilla tactics against Miracle, and the basic combat devices were perfect for that strategy. Zero Wing had the upper hand numerically, only lacking quality experts. Besides, Miracle's ordinary experts weren't the cause of her headaches. Its peak experts were. Peak experts could exhibit far greater combat power in small fights than in large-scale combat. However, if Zero Wing's Tier 2 experts equipped the basic combat device, they might be able to put up a good fight. Following which, Gentle Snow returned to Lake Heart City with the 22 basic combat devices. She then recalled all of the guild's Tier 2 experts in the area, anxious to test the device's effects. Meanwhile, in one of Lake Heart City's high-class restaurants. "Boss Soul, we've just received a report from the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion. Zero Wing has sent a 100-man team to quest in Blue Wave Rock. A level 58, Tier 2 assassin reported after approaching Shredded Soul." "Zero Wing still won't give up?" Shredded Soul chuckled. "Notify the nearby teams and get rid of them. Teach Zero Wing that it no longer has a foothold in Lake Heart City." Chapter 1956, First Test Lake Heart City, Blue Wave Rock. A large group of Miracle members patrolled inside a mountain surrounded by lush forest. These players had split into 32 teams of 100. Boss Starstreak, everyone's in position. If Zero Wing's members dare to set foot in Blue Wave Rock, We'll ensure that none leave alive, a level 57 ranger wearing silvery gray chainmail reported to the black-clad, indifferent youth before him. Good. Vice Guild Leader Shredded assigned us this mission personally. We need to complete it properly. You all know the consequences if we fail, Starstreak said solemnly. Shredded's soul was well known for his strict nature. He'd even demote the guild's peak experts if they didn't handle a mission properly, not to mention lower-ranked members. Hence, the guild members had given him the title, Demonic Vice Guild Leader. Boss, rest assured, Zero Wing can't even dispatch enough members to serve as a warm-up. Besides, you're in command this time. Even if Gentle Snow leads her branch guild's main force personally, she'll only be marching towards her grave, the level 57 ranger confidently declared. His confidence was not baseless. Although Shredded Soul was a strict vice guild leader, he was also a careful person. All of the 32 teams he had dispatched to Blue Wave Rock were expert teams, with over 1,000 expert players. Over 100 among them were also Tier 2 players. The peak assassin expert, Starstreak, was even in command, and his assassination and tracking standards were first-rate. 4 other peak experts were participating in the operation as well. Zero Wing had only sent a 100-man team to Blue Wave Rock, and based on the latest reports, the team only had 20 Tier 2 players. Even if the remaining 80 players were experts, defeating Zero Wing's team would be a piece of cake. While Miracle's forces waited for Zero Wing to fall into their trap, the 100-man team had rested in a forested area a short distance away for some time now. Boss Fierce, Blue Wave Rock is just ahead. My guess is that Miracle's army has been hiding there, waiting to ambush us. Are we really going in there? A level 57 Tier 1 assassin asked nervously as he looked towards Blue Wave Rock. In truth, Gentle Snow hadn't sent them here for a quest, but to fight Miracle's members. However, although the team had 20 Tier 2 experts, the rest were elite members. These elite members might hold their own against first-rate guild's elites, but they'd be lucky to defeat a super-first-rate guild's elite members in a one-on-one, not to mention Miracle's army. The 80 elite players likely wouldn't even survive against one of Miracle's expert parties. This is the mission we've been assigned, so yes, we're going there. Fortunately, your job doesn't involve fighting. You guys only need to scout the area and figure out Miracle's movement pattern. Leave the fighting to us, Fierce Snake said. Alright, we've recovered most of our stamina. It's time to move out. This operation would test the basic combat device's effects, and since that wouldn't be easy to determine in large-scale combat involving thousands of players, Gentle Snow had deliberately chosen Blue Wave Rock as the battlefield. Not only did dense forests surround the area, but its terrain was also quite complex. This was a perfectly suitable area for a small force to employ guerrilla tactics. Moreover, Miracle wouldn't be foolish enough to mobilize tens of thousands of players just to catch a 100-man team. They could fight and retreat freely in Blue Wave Rock, and Miracle's members wouldn't be able to do anything about it, but as a precaution the entire 100-man team consisted of assassins. These assassins were responsible for scouting Blue Wave Rock and preventing a situation where the Tier 2 players were surrounded and killed. After all, Tier 2 players were important assets to the guild. They must not be lost. When Fierce Snake finished speaking, the 80 Tier 1 assassins went into stealth and dispersed. Fierce Snake and the Tier 2 players then moved as a 20-man team. After wandering Blue Wave Rock for around 20 minutes, the scouting assassins located 4 100-man teams. The closest among them was less than 1,000 yards from Fierce Snake's team, while the farthest was within 4,000 yards. At this distance, the farthest team would need 10 minutes at most to reinforce the closest force. Everyone equip your combat devices. The 100-man team ahead will be our first test subjects. Fierce Snake commanded after verifying the scouting team's locations. Zero Wing's Tier 2 experts then eagerly retrieved the basic combat devices they had been assigned and used them. Although they had a general understanding of the item, they didn't know how effective it would truly be. Moreover, they had signed confidentiality contracts, which would force them to delete their accounts should they leak any information, to take part in this operation. This feels amazing. Zero Wing City's high mana environment is nowhere close to half as effective as this device. I can even hear the leaves rustle over 100 yards away. That's nothing. Look at the birds in the sky. They seem so much slower now. Once the team members had equipped the basic combat devices, the mana around them became turbulent. Although their bodies felt so much lighter, they felt their blood boil as they were overcome by an urge to fight. Charge! Fierce Snake roared. Without hesitation, Fierce Snake's 20-man force charged toward Miracle's closest team. When less than 600 yards separated the two, one of Miracle's rangers discovered the charging players. The ranger immediately reported to his Tier 2 commander. A 20-man team dares to charge at us? They must be tired of living. Leader, should we request reinforcements from the other teams? Are you joking? It's only a 20-man team. If we notify the other teams, we'll only become a laughingstock. Don't worry about that. We'll handle these fools ourselves. The Tier 2 elementalist leading the team growled before readying his players. Although his was only one of many teams Miracle had sent to Blue Wave Rock, he had more than 30 experts under his command. 4 players were even Tier 2 experts, and he was even a Refinement Realm expert. He alone was enough to defeat several non-Refinement Realm Tier 2 experts. Why would he ever fear Fierce Snake's 20-man party? Once Zero Wing's force was within 60 yards of Miracle's team, Miracle's ranged players opened fire on the 20-man party, launching spells and arrows. Despite the numerous attacks descending on his players, neither Fierce Snake nor his companions showed any intention of dodging the incoming attacks. Rather, the Tier 2 MTs moved to the front of the team, while the rest of the Tier 2 experts fell in behind them. The party then charged into the bombardment. Boom, boom, boom. A rain of spells and arrows showered Zero Wing's Tier 2 MTs. However, the results left Miracle's members dumbfounded. Not only did the 3 MTs block every one of their attacks with their shields, but they also retained all of their HP after doing so. Before Miracle's members snapped out of their daze, Fierce Snake reached the enemy melee players and brandished his level 55, dark gold ranked battle axe. Boom. A violent storm sent several players flying back by over a dozen yards, losing a significant chunk of their HP. The difference in strength was clear. The rest of Zero Wing's Tier 2 players had also spread out, pouncing on Miracle's members like starving tigers. Zero Wing's players dodged Miracle's attacks without much effort, even the Tier 2 experts' attacks. With Zero Wing's strength and speed advantages, Miracle's Tier 2 experts were forced to retreat, continuously losing HP. Miracle's Tier 2 experts only stayed alive, albeit barely, thanks to the support from their healers and companions. How? He clearly hasn't reached the Refinement Realm yet, so how is he displaying such great combat power? The Tier 2 elementalist leading Miracle's team couldn't believe his eyes. Although Fierce Snake had higher basic attributes, the man's attributes were high enough to keep him on the run. However, not only was Fierce Snake's perception astonishingly acute, but the Berserker's reaction speed was also impressively fast. The Berserker even blocked attacks that no normal player should be able to. After less than 30 seconds, nearly half of Miracle's 100-man team had been annihilated. Quick! Notify Boss Starstreak and the others. The Tier 2 elementalist shouted in a panic. Chapter 1957, Experts Close to the Peak. Starstreak and his team had set up camp on one of Blue Wave Rock's barren hillsides. They had excellent visibility, which allowed them to scout their surroundings. Unfortunately, the monsters in the area had short respawn times and constantly need to be cleared out. Currently, Starstreak's team fought dozens of level 62 cliffside gargoyles. Boss, Deep Trace's team has been attacked by Zero Wing and is requesting immediate backup, a level 57 ranger reported. Zero Wing has taken the initiative to attack? Starstreak, who commanded the battle against the gargoyles, could not help but chuckle. It seems they haven't learned from the previous lessons. Send the nearby teams to reinforce Deep Trace immediately. Tell the other teams to head towards their location as well. Do not allow Zero Wing to escape. The level 57 ranger immediately relayed the command to the various teams. Fortunately, the closest team was only 3 minutes away from Deep Trace, and once the 2 teams grouped up, they should have no problems pinning down Zero Wing long enough for the other 2 nearby teams, which were about 10 minutes away, to arrive. Once the 4 teams surrounded Zero Wing's members, the latter would have no chance to flee. Starstreak then led his team as they withdrew from the battle, ignoring the provoked cliffside gargoyles and heading straight for Zero Wing. Shredded Soul had given him this mission personally, and he had no choice but to take it seriously. Although Starstreak felt that 4 teams should be enough to defeat Zero Wing's 100-man team, he decided to head there personally as a precaution. Elsewhere, Fierce Snake's 20-man party fought with more vigor as time passed. On the other hand, fear overwhelmed the Tier 2 elementalist that led Miracle's team as he watched his teammates die, one after another. What is this? Just what is going on? The Elementalist couldn't believe his eyes as he watched Fierce Snake and his comrades cut down Miracle's players. At first, Zero Wing's defense had contained many weak points, but as the battle progressed, these weaknesses had vanished. Zero Wing's fighters had also reduced their excess movements. It was as if Fierce Snake and his players had obtained a new body and adapted as they fought. His spells had been, more or less, able to interrupt Fierce Snake's strikes at the beginning of this fight, but the Berserker now chased him while dodging or blocking his spells without issue. While the Tier 2 Elementalist was awed by Fierce Snake's improvements, the Berserker continued to tighten his control. Now he completely abandoned defense and utilized the basic combat technique Windshadow Footwork for the first time in this battle. Like a light breeze, Fierce Snake weaved his way through the incoming spells. In 2 breaths, Fierce Snake dodged the spells and reached the Elementalist. He then swung down with his battle axe. Tier 2 skill, Thundering Impact. The battle axe descended on the Tier 2 Elementalist like a lightning bolt. The enemy player had no way of coping with the attack's speed or strength. Boom. When the lightning bolt landed, the blast carved out a massive crater beneath the Elementalist. The caster, who had only had 1/3 of his HP remaining, vanished from the forest with his shattered magic shield. Only a robe remained of the player. When Miracle's members saw this, they despaired. The Tier 2 Elementalist had been their leader and a bona fide Refinement Realm expert. He could hold off several non-Refinement Realm, Tier 2 experts by himself during their sparring sessions. Now that even their powerful leader had died, how were they supposed to face Fierce Snake and the others? Run away. One of Miracle's members instinctively shouted before turning and fleeing the battlefield. Run away? Can you though? Fierce Snake ran after the fleeing player before snatching up the robe his prior prey had dropped. When the basic combat device increased his and his teammates' life ratings, their basic attributes had received a significant boost. The improvement was akin to activating a miniature berserk skill. Their HP in particular had doubled. At the same time, their movement speed had risen considerably. Fierce Snake was even confident of defeating an excellently equipped Tier 2 assassin with his current movement speed. After less than a minute since the battle had begun, all of Miracle's 100 elite and expert players were dead. In contrast, Fierce Snake's team of 20 had suffered 0 casualties. Boss Fierce, Miracle's other teams are heading your way, one of the scouting assassins reported in the team chat. The nearest team should arrive in about 2 minutes. 2 minutes? After giving the matter some thought, Fierce Snake looked at the teammates around him and asked, "We should have enough time. Brothers, what do you think? Will you be ready for round 2 after a short break?" "Don't be insulting, boss. That fight was barely a warm-up." "That's right. Boss, you're so sneaky. You fought the enemy leader by yourself and only left the small fries for us. We barely got a chance to test any new combat techniques." Every player in the 20-man party agreed with Fierce Snake's conclusion. In fact, they brimmed with fighting spirit. They had discovered how powerful the basic combat devices were in their previous battle, and due to their new life ratings, they could finally execute the combat techniques that had given them too much trouble before. This was a great opportunity to grasp these techniques fully. Of course, they still couldn't use these combat techniques casually since it was such a burden on their stamina. By using combat techniques they had yet to master, they lost stamina even faster than usual. Hence, they only used the techniques when they fought powerful enemies. Tier 1 experts simply weren't worth the effort. "Good. I'll leave the big ones to you in the next battle," Fierce Snake said, laughing. After resting for a short time, another team from Miracle stumbled on Fierce Snake's party. However, before the new arrivals could get a grasp of the situation, Fierce Snake and his players charged toward them. Fierce Snake's party had already adapted to the basic combat device's effects, so they eliminated the second Miracle team with far more efficiency. Once their enemies were dead, they retreated from the battlefield. By the time the third and fourth Miracle teams arrived, only an empty battlefield was there to greet them. "What did you say? Zero Wing killed 2 teams with just 20 people?" Starstreak paled when he heard his subordinate's report. After calming his burning rage, he continued coldly, "Send me the battle videos. From now on, I want all teams to move in pairs." Starstreak examined the battle videos he had received after disconnecting the call. How is this possible? Since when has Zero Wing had so many powerful experts? Starstreak's anger vanished when he saw the fight between his guildmates and Fierce Snake's group, his expression hardening. Originally, he had refused to believe that Zero Wing had slaughtered 2 100-man teams with only 20 players, even accomplishing this feat before reinforcements could arrive. They shouldn't be able to wipe out two teams so quickly even if Fierce Snake and his party were all Tier 2 players, but after watching the videos he understood how it had happened. Although Fierce Snake and the others had not reached the refinement realm, their combat power nearly rivaled that of peak experts due to their attributes, extraordinary perception and reaction time and combat techniques. Even Starstreak would need some time to take Fierce Snake down by himself. If he had to face 2 or 3 experts of this caliber, even he'd be forced to retreat, and every member of Zero Wing's 20-man party wielded the same combat power. Even his 100-man team might lose against such a monstrous party, much less the other teams patrolling Blue Wave Rock. Starstreak, what's happened? A level 58 Tier 2 Ranger asked when he noticed Starstreak's twisted expression. It's nothing, Starstreak said, shaking his head. Inform all teams to give up the search for Zero Wing immediately. Give up. But we have orders from Vice Guild Leader Shredded. The Rangers stared at Starstreak in astonishment. I understand. I'll report the situation to the Vice Guild Leader personally, Starstreak said, nodding. Even so, shouldn't you give us a reason? The Ranger asked. A reason? Smiling bitterly, Starstreak responded, what if I tell you that the 20-man team we're chasing consists of experts with the combat power to rival peak experts? Is that enough of a reason? What a joke. If their remaining 3,000 members worked together to fight Zero Wing's 20-man party head-on, it might be a different story, but trying to catch 20 peak experts in this forest was impossible. Even though Blue Wave Rock's forest wasn't particularly large, they'd still need 10 times their current manpower to accomplish such a feat. Chapter 1958, Promotion to Intermediate Master. Black Dragon Empire, Lakeheart City. Several guild elders and over a dozen upper echelons occupied the guild leader's office within Miracle's temporary residence. They all quietly and carefully watched the emaciated, middle-aged man before them. This man was none other than Shredded Soul, one of Miracle's mythical existences. Although the people present were all peak experts, they were tense with fear as Shredded Soul's aura washed over them. The tension in the room was all due to the message Starstreak had just sent. Has Starstreak gone mad? He only has to take out 100 Zero Wing members, yet he dares to retreat despite having over 3,000 players under his command? Doesn't he know that the Vice Guild Leader hates retreating more than anything? This is the first time I've seen the Vice Guild Leader so angry. Hopefully, Starstreak's punishment won't be crippling. The upper echelons whispered amongst themselves as they gazed at Shredded Soul's frosty expression. They all agreed that Starstream must be tired of living in God's domain. Shredded Soul's authority in the guild was only second to the guild leaders, and while the other Vice Guild leaders had command of their subordinates, the man before them could mobilize any player in Miracle. Even the guild's trump card legions were forced to follow Shredded Soul's commands. Shredded Soul even had the authority to remove guild elders from their positions as long as he had enough reasoning to do so, let alone regular guild members. Even the other Vice Guild leaders feared this man. But there was no helping it. Shredded Soul was responsible for major contributions to the guild, and all of the guild's founding elders and the guild leaders stood behind his authority. A chill ran down the various upper echelon spines as they thought about Starstreak's opposition to Shredded Soul's command. After a long moment of tense silence, Shredded Soul finally seemed to relax. The watching crowd then released a sigh of relief. Good. Very good. Shredded Soul's lips curled as he read the report from Starstreak. I have underestimated Zero Wing. It's no wonder why such a small guild dares to provoke Miracle. Vice Guild Leader, what happened? Is there something unique about this 100-man team from Zero Wing? One of the upper echelons asked curiously. Shredded Soul had clearly been furious about Starstreak's decision to flee from Blue Wave Rock a moment ago, but after reading the follow-up report, the Vice Guild Leader actually smiled. Those that knew Shredded Soul knew what his smile meant. He had either found something interesting or an opponent that he considered appropriate. Take a look for yourselves. Shredded Soul said as he input the report and displayed the information before the crowd. He then played the battle video involving Fierce Snake and the other Tier 2 Zero Wing experts. As Fierce Snake and his comrades fought the first team, their movements were clumsy but had visibly improved during the fight against the second team. Even when facing Miracle's Tier 2 Refinement Realm experts in a one-on-one, Fierce Snake and the others had gained the upper hand, slowly whittling down their opponents. Every member on Zero Wing's 20-man team wielded combat power that rivaled Miracle's peak experts. How is that possible? How does Zero Wing have so many experts with peak-level combat power? Based on our information, although Zero Wing is stronger than the average first-rate guild, it has less than 10 peak experts. How did it suddenly gain an additional 20? Miracle's upper echelons watched Fierce Snake and his team fight with wide eyes. After watching the videos, they realized why Starstreak had ordered a retreat. With the forces under his command, facing 20 experts with peak-level combat power who used guerrilla tactics would be suicidal. Even a team of several hundred players would be helpless against 20 peak experts. If they wanted to hunt these players down in the field, they'd have to dispatch 1,000-man teams for the search, and several tens of thousands for the fight. Notify Starstreak that his forces are allowed to retreat, Shredded Soul said calmly. Vice Guild Leader, Zero Wing is clearly trying to put on a show. Are we just going to let them get away with this? One of Miracle's upper echelons asked. With the forces Miracle had sent to the Black Dragon Empire, cordoning off Blue Wave Rock and hunting down Zero Wing's team was entirely possible. We are Miracle. We do not need such wasteful tactics to eliminate Zero Wing. Since the guild wants to show off its abilities in guerrilla warfare, we'll do the same. Shredded Soul snapped, smiling. Split up our forces and have them deal with Zero Wing's members. Rather than focusing on the areas around Lake Heart City, we'll target every Zero Wing player in the Black Dragon Empire. I want to see who can rack up the most kills. When they heard Shredded Soul's command, realization dawned on the crowd. So what if Zero Wing had a party of peak combatants? Zero Wing's overall strength was nothing compared to Miracle's. If Miracle scattered its forces and attacked multiple locations at once, how many areas could Zero Wing keep safe? Although doing so would incur losses, Zero Wing's suffering would be much greater. After Starstreak received the command to retreat, he led his forces away from Blue Wave Rock. Meanwhile, news of this situation quickly spread to the various superpowers. Miracle has retreated? What happened at Blue Wave Rock? Miracle's retreat surprised the various superpowers, and they immediately ordered infestations on the battle at Blue Wave Rock. However, when the reports came in, the superpowers that had been watching the war between Zero Wing and Miracle were astonished. They had never considered that Zero Wing had such a sturdy foundation. They also marveled at Zero Wing's performance. They hadn't expected Shredded Soul to suffer such a loss, albeit a minor one, at Zero Wing's hands. It had been a long time since a non-superpower had accomplished such a feat. When Phoenix Rain, who was busy on Thunder Island, received the news, she was stunned. Unyielding Heart and Illusory Words, who explored an ancient ruin in the Dark Knight Empire, were astonished as well. However, Shifeng, who toiled in Zero Wing City's candlelight trading firm, remained wholly ignorant of the matter, thoroughly absorbed in forging basic combat devices. After over a day of work, Shifeng received a system notification. System, strengthened basic combat device has been successfully manufactured. Forging proficiency increased by 5 points. Obtained 368,000 EXP. System, congratulations. You have been promoted to an intermediate master forger. Chapter 1959, Forging Treasure Chest. Finally, Shifeng cried out when he heard the system notification. Intermediate Master Forger. This was a huge threshold for forgers to cross. Although it was extremely difficult to become a Master Forger, with how many players God's Domain had, quite a few were capable of reaching the Master rank. However, the majority of these Master Forgers would grind to a halt at the basic Master rank. A forger would only receive the various superpowers' attention after becoming an intermediate master. Meanwhile, to the various superpowers, basic Master Forgers were simply qualified to join them. Only by becoming an intermediate Master Forger could players craft truly powerful war weapons. In addition, only intermediate Master Forgers and above could producing top-tier Dark Gold weapons and equipment for expert players. After all, even among Dark Gold weapons and equipment, there was a considerable difference between the basic attributes and additional effects they provided. Take the level 55 to 60 Dark Gold equipment he forged using the standardized designs he had acquired from Titan City, for example. Despite being at the Dark Gold rank, those pieces were nothing compared to ordinary Dark Gold equipment of the same level that dropped from bosses. They were only slightly stronger than fine gold equipment of the same level. Moreover, a forger qualified to produce epic weapons and equipment after becoming an intermediate master. In contrast, basic master forgers could only produce dark gold weapons and equipment at best. Moreover, they would be limited to forging the most ordinary dark gold ranked items since they'd have such a low success rate when attempting to craft top-tier weapons and equipment of the same rank. While a basic master had a chance of successfully producing epic weapons and equipment, in theory, not even the various superpowers would be willing to front the production costs. They'd only tolerate an intermediate master forger's success rates. Now that Shifeng was an intermediate master forger, he could finally begin production for the Guardian puppet. Now, all he needed to do was to stockpile the necessary materials to mass-produce it. Once he had amassed enough Guardian puppets, not only would Zero Wing be capable of defending its territories, but it could also afford to relax its guard. The guild would be able to fight the evil god's temple in the fields. Even capturing Ancient Rock City would be possible. Shortly after Shifeng received the notification informing him of his subclass's new rank, a second notification reached his ears. System, congratulations. You are the first player to become an intermediate master forger in Starmoon Kingdom. Rewarding 1 silver forging treasure chest and humanity reputation plus 50. A silver forging treasure chest? Surprise flashed in Shifeng's eyes as a silver chest, studded with a 5-colored gemstone, appearing in his bag space. At this stage of the game, players were ignorant of forging treasure chests. However, all forging players had dreamed of acquiring one during his previous life. As the name suggested, forging treasure chests contained items specifically for forgers, such as secret forging techniques, forging designs and various forging tools. In the past, there had even been rumors that these chests could drop mysterious flames. To forging players, forging treasure chests were far more valuable than ordinary treasure chests. Normally, players had to complete high-ranked quests for their subclass to obtain such a treasure chest, and even then the quests normally only awarded bronze forging treasure chests. Shifeng had only ever heard of the silver version. He had never seen one personally. He had never thought that he would receive such a reward for being the first person to become an intermediate master forger in Starmoon Kingdom. Immediately, Shifeng removed the silver forging treasure chest from his bag and activated Divine Providence. When Shifeng opened the treasure chest, the lid slowly lifted. A dazzling 5-colored light escaped the chest, illuminating the forging room. When the glow eventually faded, 2 items appeared before Shifeng. One was a hammer engraved with dark purple runes, while the other was an old book. When Shifeng tried to inspect the items, all they would reveal was the word, unknown. These are. After Shifeng appraised both items with omniscient eyes, he could not help but stare at the items with wide, surprised eyes. Magic Refining Hammer, Dark Gold Rank, Durability 200 out of 200. Equipment Requirement, Master Forger. Increases production speed by 10%, success rate when producing items below epic rank by 5%, and success rate when producing items at epic rank by 2%. 100 Refinement Gold Design. 100 Refinement Gold has a certain chance of granting weapons and equipment below epic rank the metallic reinforcement buff, strengthening the item by 10%. Each weapon or equipment piece can only be strengthened once. Players are allowed to equip a maximum of 3 weapons and equipment with the metallic reinforcement buff at a time. Amazing. It's no wonder why there had barely been any information about silver forging treasure chests in the past. Shifeng's eyes glowed as he read the 2 items' attribute panels. Both items were extraordinarily valuable, especially the 100 Refinement Gold design. This would be an excellent item for strengthening his guild members. He wouldn't even trade it for tens of thousands of gold. Meanwhile, with the Magic Refining Hammer, he would have a slightly higher success rate when forging items. Following which, Shifeng notified Aqua Rose and had her collect large quantities of the necessary materials for the Guardian puppet. Meanwhile, he intended to continue his work with the basic combat devices. Zero Wing urgently needed more of these devices. Miracle had withdrawn from the Zero Wing members who wielded basic combat devices, but it had redirected its focus to whittling down the guild's forces in the Empire. This situation had given Gentle Snow a massive headache. Although he had focused on forging the basic combat devices to produce more temporary peak experts, he could only craft around 200 devices each day. He was also expending a ridiculous number of magic crystals to do so. If Aqua Rose hadn't already arranged the necessary manpower to mine the manatite vein, which earned the guild tens of thousands of magic crystals every day, he would have likely emptied Zero Wings reserved in a single day. Furthermore, he had to take breaks from time to time. He couldn't perform such high-intensity work without rest. Unfortunately, each basic combat device could only last 12 hours. If he wanted to ensure the safety of Zero Wings members during the day, he'd need to equip each Tier 2 expert with 2 or 3 devices. In other words, Zero Wing could only maintain around 100 peak experts in the fields. With how large the Black Dragon Empire was, it was impossible to safeguard all of Zero Wing's members as they operated in various locations. As a result, they had to prioritize a few important leveling maps. Sadly, it was no longer possible to gather Zero Wing's members in a select few maps. Due to Zero Wing's constant expansion, the branch guild had too many members. Meanwhile, each map could only accommodate a limited number of players. Overly saturating a map would only impede the guild members' development. Hence, Zero Wing sustained significant losses. The guild's foundation wasn't strong enough, and there was no comparison between the number of experts in Zero Wing and those in Miracle. Zero Wing had already suffered over 10,000 casualties. In contrast, Miracle had suffered less than 2,000 casualties. The difference was clear. Although Shifeng had considered sending Fire Dance and the other main force members as reinforcements, Silverwing Town's defenses also required a large number of experts. This put the guild in an awkward position. Fortunately, things had taken a turn for the better. Even with the various support tools at his disposal, he had only pushed his forging success rate to around 50%, but now that he was an intermediate master forger and had the magic refining hammer, his success rate had risen to 70%. Moreover, his production speed had increased by at least 25%. Overall, he could forge nearly twice as many basic combat devices in the same amount of time. In other words, he could craft around 400 devices each day, which would allow him to double the patrols in the Black Dragon Empire. Time passed quickly. After working for an entire day, Shifeng had finally produced 400 basic combat devices. Among them, 21 were strengthened basic combat devices. Suddenly, Gentle Snow contacted Shifeng asking, "Guild leader, have you finished forging the basic combat devices yet? Our current device's duration is almost up. If we can't restock, our operations will crumble." The war with Miracle hadn't been particularly tense at first, but as time passed, Miracle had dispatched more experts to the Empire, becoming a far more formidable foe. Now Zero Wing was at a complete disadvantage. If the guild's experts lost the basic combat devices as well, Miracle would quickly crush them. "They're done. I'll deliver them to you in a moment," Shifeng said, chuckling. "They're done?" Gentle Snow breathed a sigh of relief. "I recall the patrols now, then." After Gentle Snow disconnected the call, she contacted the Tier 2 players fighting Miracle's forces and ordered their return. As for Shifeng, he finished organizing the new devices and called Melancholic Smile. "Melancholic, how are things on your side?" Shifeng asked when he saw Melancholic Smile's tired expression. "Guild leader, this magic-breaking crossbow is too hard to produce. We've only completed 60 crossbows thus far," Melancholic Smile reported, slightly ashamed of her progress. 60. After giving the matter some thought, Shifeng said, "That should be enough. Send them to me." Chapter 1960, Send them on their way. Black Dragon Empire, Lakeheart City, Zero Wing's residence. Due to the war against Miracle, an awkward atmosphere had infiltrated the residence. While they rested, Zero Wing's members felt an invisible noose slowly tightening around their necks, capable of stealing their lives at any moment. "Snow, this is bad. We've already suffered over 35,000 casualties. Although the majority of the victims are normal members, everyone is afraid for their lives. Moreover, Miracle has deliberately announced the number of slain Zero Wing members, scaring away potential recruits. Many of our guild members are considering moving to another country to level up. At this rate, the Black Dragon Empire's branch guild will be finished sooner or later," Zhao Yueru worriedly reported to Gentle Snow. The strength Miracle had displayed thus far was utterly beyond what they had imagined. Miracle had already dispatched over 100,000 members to the Black Dragon Empire. Among them, over 20,000 were confirmed expert players. This was simply ridiculous. The average first-rate guild only had several thousand expert players in total, yet Miracle had sent over 20,000 to harass Zero Wing. That was nearly triple the number of experts in Zero Wing. To make matters worse, Miracle had rapidly improved the quality of its forces. In the last 2 days alone, the enemy guild had dispatched more than 1,000 Tier 2 players to the Empire. In contrast, Zero Wing had only slightly increased the number of Tier 2 players under its command. Furthermore, Miracle had bolstered its forces with plenty of Refinement Realm experts, dispatching more of these players than the number of experts Zero Wing had equipped with basic combat devices. In addition, Miracle still had various guild elders, none of which had made a move yet. No matter how she looked at it, this difference between them and their enemy was impossible to overcome. None of those factors are our main problem right now. I've just received a report stating that Miracle's performance has encouraged a number of the Empire's powers, and they've begun to move against us, Gentle Snow said, a cold glint flashing in her eyes. These little powers are normally neutral, but now that they realize that we are slowly losing to Miracle, they are taking advantage of the situation to kick us while we're down. Some have even started to mock us on the forums, demanding a decisive battle in the Ice Jade Forest. They wouldn't have been forced into such a passive state if their only enemy had been Miracle. While it was true that Miracle had sent over 100,000 players to the Black Dragon Empire, Zero Wing's branch guild still had the numerical advantage. However, Miracle wasn't the only power to target Zero Wing. Many of the Empire's large guilds had pegged them as an enemy as well, boosting Miracle's momentum in this war. Upon hearing this, Zhao Yueru's expression darkened. If this were true, Zero Wing's branch guild in the Black Dragon Empire was on the path to destruction. The other guilds are kicking us while we're down? Shi Feng, who had just entered the room, frowned as he overheard the two women's conversation. MHM. Gentle Snow nodded as she turned to Shi Feng. They aren't fools, guild leader. They know that we cannot afford to face Miracle head-on, resorting to guerrilla tactics. Hence, they're boldly ambushing our guild members. However, if we dispatch our forces to deal with these interlopers, either they'll notify Miracle or Miracle will hear of it from their spies, setting up an ambush for our reinforcements. We have already lost nearly 3,000 experts thanks to these little powers' interference. With the branch guild strength, Zero Wing could easily deal with these large guilds, but they were using themselves as bait to lure Zero Wing's experts in for Miracle. Zero Wing couldn't simply dispatch a small group of experts as reinforcements since these large guilds employed 1,000-man teams for their ambushes, yet if their guild dispatched an equally large force, Miracle would discover their movements immediately and use the opportunity to cripple Zero Wing. This was the cause of her current headache. Whether Zero Wing fought or not, it would suffer. Snow, gather 1,000 experts in the residence. Smiling, Shi Feng continued, since Miracle wants a frontal confrontation and we have enemies who want to act like bait, we'll fulfill their wishes. But Gentle Snow wondered if Shi Feng truly understood Miracle's situation when he issued his command, but before she could dissuade him, he sent her a trade request, dropping a large number of basic combat devices and magic-breaking crossbows into the trade window. After taking a look at the total numbers, Gentle Snow was dazed. She couldn't believe her eyes. 400 basic combat devices. They could dispatch 200 peak experts to the Black Dragon Empire's various maps for an entire day with so many devices. There were also the magic-breaking crossbows to consider. The crossbows' attacks had the power of Tier 3 attacks. A direct hit would guarantee an instant kill. Even if the target blocked the attack, the impact would still be significant. Most importantly, the magic-breaking crossbows could easily be carried and used. Players with these crossbows would be akin to miniature defense turrets. Understood. I'll see to it immediately. Gentle Snow abandoned all thoughts of opposing Shi Feng's commands. A seed of anticipation even began to sprout in her heart. She immediately recalled the Tier 1 and 2 experts operating near Lake Heart. Over the past 2 days, quite a few Tier 1 experts had completed their Tier 2 promotion quests. Since the branch guild in Lake Heart City urgently needed experts, the new Tier 2 players were sent here. As a result, more than 500 Tier 2 experts operated around Lake Heart City right now. Even after deducting the Tier 2 experts that had been sent to protect the guild's leveling maps, gathering 200 of these experts on short notice wouldn't be a problem. In no time at all, 200 Tier 2 experts and 800 Tier 1 experts had gathered in Zero Wing's residence in Lake Heart City. Shi Feng gave each of the Tier 2 experts a basic combat device and distributed the 60 magic-breaking crossbows amongst the Tier 1 rangers, who were particularly skilled with long-ranged attacks. Once the team was prepared, Shi Feng boldly led his 1,000-man force out of Lake Heart City, heading for the Ice Jade Forest, a resource-rich, level 60 to 75 map. This was also where Zero Wings members encountered miracles most often. Meanwhile, in one of the high-class restaurants around Lake Heart City's Central Plaza. Just what is Black Flame thinking? He's actually sending a 1,000-man team to Ice Jade Forest? Doesn't he realize that Miracle and the various large guilds have occupied that map already? Yuan Tiexing could not help his surprise when he read the latest report on Zero Wing. Over a dozen large guilds had gathered in the Ice Jade Forest, and Miracle had stationed a significant portion of its army in the area. There should be more than 150,000 players in the forest at the moment, and they were all elite and expert players. Even if Zero Wing gathered every one of its players in the Black Dragon Empire, it would fail to wrestle back the Ice Jade Forest, much less a 1,000-man team. While Yuan Tiexing wondered about Zero Wing's purpose, Shi Feng and his team reached the Ice Jade Forest by mount. Guild leader, we discovered a team raiding a field boss. It has roughly 3,000 players. 2,000 Miracle members are also lying in wait, a Tier 2 assassin reported to Shi Feng. Since we found them, let's send them on their way. Shi Feng commanded indifferently. Chapter 1961, Slaughtering Time. Icy blue frost covered the Ice Jade Forest trees. From afar it looked like a crystal forest. Since the monsters in the area had a chance of dropping ice crystal fragments, which could be refined into ice resistance potions, many powers came here to grind. Moreover, as the monsters in the Ice Jade Forest were not skilled with magic and had no ranged attacks, they were relatively easy to kill. Because of these factors, the Ice Jade Forest had become one of the most important resource maps within the Lake Heart City region. A 3,000-man expert team from the Tier 2 Guild, Eternal Undead, currently raided the Eight-Eyed Frost Spider, a level 62 specialized Grand Lord. The team had split into 3 groups of 1,000 and took turns tanking the Grand Lord and its 100-plus Guardian Frost Spiders. When a group was near its breaking point, it would swiftly retreat, switching places with one of the other 2 groups and ensuring that only 1,000 players remained within the boss's sphere of influence. This prevented the boss from receiving an attribute boost. The boss is going to enter its berserk state soon. MTs, use your life-saving skills. Healer unit, switch with the reserve unit. Miserly Wind, one of Eternal Undead's Vice Guild leaders, hurriedly ordered as the Eight-Eyed Frost Spider's HP was about to fall to 30%. The guild's members followed the orders seamlessly as the MTs activated their life-saving skills and the healers gradually retreated from the battlefield. At the same time, the waiting healers switched places with their comrades before they ran out of mana. When the Eight-Eyed Frost Spider went berserk, the team's level 58, Tier 2 MTs rapidly lost HP. Seeing this, the rear-line healers cast one healing spell after another without paying heed to their mana consumption. This prevented the MT's HPs from falling below a safe limit. In the meantime, the Eight-Eyed Frost Spider's HP steadily dropped. Boss Wind, this place is awesome. Not only is our leveling speed here so fast, but we've also collected a ton of ice resistance resources. We should have partnered with Miracle sooner. The guild might have given us a spot in the inner region. A level 58, Tier 2 Oracle said excitedly as he watched the near-dead Eight-Eyed Frost Spider. The guild leader has his own concerns. We weren't sure how serious Miracle was about eliminating Zero Wing, and we couldn't recklessly provoke Zero Wing, Miserly Wind said, smiling. But now that we know how furious Miracle is with the guild and that it fully intends to annihilate Zero Wing, we don't have to worry about them. Even if we are bait, Zero Wing won't dare to attack us, and we can grind in such a resource-rich area in return. I actually hope that Zero Wing comes looking for a fight. If they do, we'll be able to earn some extra income, the Tier 2 Oracle said as he licked his lips in anticipation. That isn't likely. Zero Wing should know that it has no place in the Ice Jade Forest anymore. Of course, Miracle has cut the guild off from every map in the Lake Heart City region, not just the Ice Jade Forest. If Zero Wing dares to dispatch a force to any of these maps, Miracle will destroy it. However, Zero Wing will crumble sooner or later regardless of what it does. Now that the various large guilds are provoking Zero Wing on the official forums, its reputation will suffer if it refuses to respond. If the situation drags on, no player will want to be a member of the guild, Miserly Wind said, chuckling. Once Zero Wing is gone, our guild can garrison in Lake Heart City and enjoy a share of the Ice Crystal World's profits. Just as the Eight-Eyed Frost Spider was about to die, Shi Feng's 1,000-man team had sneaked within 2,000 yards of Eternal Undead's army. The team's 200 Tier 2 experts led the charge against Eternal Undead on their mounts, while the remaining 800 experts followed on foot. Eternal Undead scouting rangers immediately noticed the commotion and reported back to the team. Boss Wind, we found Zero Wings members. They're charging toward our team. The oracle beside Miserly Wind exclaimed as he read the scout's message. What? Have Zero Wings members lost their minds? The news confused Miserly Wind. How many are there? It's a 1,000-man team, the Tier 2 oracle said. A 1,000-man team? Miserly Wind chuckled. Zero Wings sorely overestimates itself. It dares to charge at us with just 1,000 players? Do they think that Eternal Undead is a guild of pushovers? Tell our players to finish the boss quickly and prepare to greet Zero Wings' team. This is our guild's chance to bolster our fame in the Black Dragon Empire. We mustn't let Miracle's members take it from us. Among his 3,000 players, 1,500 were experts and 40+ were Tier 2 players. Miserly Wind was not worried about Zero Wings' assault at all. When Zero Wings' 1,000-man team was less than 500 yards away from Eternal Undeads, the latter finally defeated the 8-eyed Frost Spider. Under Miserly Wind's command, Eternal Undeads members then fell into a defensive formation to greet the enemy guild. Attack! Our chance to get rich has come. Miserly Wind shouted when less than 100 yards separated the two forces. The battlefield glowed with countless lights as spells and arrows flew to meet Zero Wings' Tier 2 experts as they led the charge. Kill them! Fierce Snake bellowed when he saw the incoming attacks. He brandished his battle axe, slamming it on the ground before him. The earth split and walls of rock and dirt rose up before Fierce Snake, stopping the spells and arrows that targeted his players. Zero Wings' other Tier 2 players didn't bother to dodge the incoming attacks either. Like Fierce Snake, they blocked every attack without fail. Although some of the incoming attacks included Tier 2 spells and skills, they posed no threat to Zero Wings' Tier 2 players due to the basic combat device's effects. With little to no effort, Zero Wings' Tier 2 players stopped one wave of attacks after another, soon reaching Eternal Undead's defensive wall. The defensive wall Eternal Undead's MTs had formed was practically non-existent to Fierce Snake and his comrades. With a single attack, each of Zero Wings' Tier 2 melee players sent multiple MTs flying. In the blink of an eye, Fierce Snake and the others broke through Eternal Undead's defensive wall and pounced on the ranged players like hungry lions pouncing on a flock of sheep. Eternal Undead's Tier 1 players lasted no more than a handful of hits before Zero Wings' enhanced Tier 2 experts, and the enemy guild's Tier 2 experts were no exception. The difference between their basic attributes was already massive, and after including physique, reaction speed and several other aspects, Eternal Undead's members stood no chance against these Zero Wing experts. Even though Eternal Undead's healers frantically cast their healing spells, they couldn't stop the rapid drain on their allies' HPs. After a brief moment, over 500 of Eternal Undead's players were dead, their bodies transforming into streaks of light and fading from the ice jade forest. How is this possible? Miserly Wind's eyes widened in shock, paling as he watched his guild's experts die, one after another. He had never dreamed that his guild's experts would be so weak against Zero Wings' Tier 2 experts. In fact, not even Eternal Undead's Tier 2 players survived more than a few hits from Fierce Snake and his friends. However, Miserly Wind didn't know that Fierce Snake and his team had the combat power to rival peak experts. Naturally, 200 peak experts would have no trouble slaughtering 3,000 ordinary experts, and only half of Eternal Undead's team consisted of expert players. Upon seeing Zero Wings' remaining 800 players draw near, fear overwhelmed Miserly Wind. 200 of these players had already devastated his team. If another 800 players joined the fray. Retreat. Everyone retreat to Miracle's teams. We'll be safe once we meet up with them. Miserly Wind shouted in a panic. Chapter 1962, Bait. As soon as Miserly Wind gave the command to retreat, Eternal Undead's panicking members calmed down and ran towards Miracle's last known grinding spot. Although Zero Wings members were strong, Miracle was a veteran super-first-rate guild that rivaled super guilds. Not only did the guild have its fair share of experts, but those experts were also far superior to those in Eternal Undead in terms of weapons, equipment and combat standards. Most importantly, Zero Wing would not dare to fight Miracle in a large-scale battle. As long as they met up with one of Miracle's 1,000-man teams, they'd have protection from Zero Wing. Like madmen, Eternal Undead's remaining 2,000+ members split up and ran for Miracle's teams. Fierce Snake and his companions were momentarily stunned as they watched their enemies flee. The battle hadn't even started 10 seconds ago, yet their opponents were already running for their lives. Boss Wind, I've contacted Miracle. It's sending its teams to our location now. The Tier 2 Oracle informed Miserly Wind, who wore a twisted expression. He could empathize with his leader. Of the 3,000 players their guild had dispatched, half were expert players, yet the moment they collided with Zero Wing, they had lost more than 300 of those experts. The guild only had a little over 4,000 expert players in total, and nearly 10% had died in the blink of an eye. This was a heavy blow to their guild. Notify everyone and tell them to lure as many Zero Wing members to Miracle's forces as possible. We cannot let Zero Wing off the hook after killing so many of our guild's experts. Miserly Wind growled as he glanced at the enemy players chasing him and his teammates. We'll meet up with Miracle and surround Zero Wing's team, slaughtering every one of its players. Their guild had lost too much in this battle, but the lost levels were only secondary. The lost weapons and equipment was far more important. The guild had used a lot of resources to acquire these items for their experts. Meanwhile, before they had collected a notable harvest from the Ice Jade Forest, they had lost so many assets. They had to get payback. Understood. I'll have the others maintain their distance from Zero Wing's members, the Tier 2 Oracle said, nodding. When he glanced back at Fierce Snake and the others who still pursued Eternal Undead's players, he thought this was a good opportunity to recoup their losses. Let's see if Zero Wing can deal with a stronger force. Zero Wing was famed for its wealth. Its members were all very equipped. Since Zero Wing's members here had such high attributes, they definitely wore top-tier weapons and equipment. Although Miserly Wind's plan would increase the team's casualty count, it would be worth it if they could claim some of Zero Wing's weapons and equipment, bolstering their guild's main force. After saying so, the Tier 2 Oracle informed his teammates to slow down deliberately. By doing so, they would ensure that Zero Wing's members who were forced to stop whenever they killed someone could catch up. This would create the illusion that Zero Wing's members would eventually catch and kill every Eternal Undead member, encouraging Fierce Snake and his team to continue the chase. After another 1,000 yards or so, Eternal Undead had a little more than 1,600 surviving members. Miserly Wind's face contorted. He hadn't expected Zero Wing's members to be so ferocious. Boss Wind, look! The Tier 2 Oracle shouted excitedly as he pointed toward the large group of players in the forest ahead. Good. Have everyone get ready. When Miserly Wind saw the Miracle's mounted members, the sight rekindled his hope. This moment will determine whether or not our guild can progress in the Black Dragon Empire. When Eternal Undead's members saw Miracle's players, they stopped holding back and ran toward Miracle's forces at full power. As if they had prepared for this moment, Miracle's 2,000-man team split into two groups, one moving towards Fierce Snake and his companions, while the other moved to intercept Shurfeng's 800 players. Guild leader, Miracle's members have arrived. Fierce Snake, who led the charge, informed Shurfeng when he saw Miracle's members emerge from the forest ahead. They're finally here? Calmly, Shurfeng ordered. In that case, let's get started. We can finally get to work. Fierce Snake's eyes glowed with excitement. He then shouted through the team chat, "Brothers, it's time to earn our keep." Wonderful. I can finally get serious. This game of cat and mouse is over. Hey, leave some for me. I want to experiment with some basic combat techniques. Excitement shot through Zero Wing's members as they watched the fleeing Eternal Undead team. Suddenly, their movement speed skyrocketed, and they instantly closed the distance between them and their prey. They then used one skill after another. For a time, bright lights and explosions filled the forest. Zero Wing's Tier 2 experts instantly slew the enemy Tier 1 experts that had lasted a few moves against them previously. 200 of the 1,600+ fleeing players fell in the blink of an eye. Despite fleeing with all of their power, Fierce Snake's team caught up with Eternal Undead's players in seconds. Following which, Eternal Undead's team member count decreased with lightning speed. After a short moment, less than 100 players remained alive from Eternal Undead. Due to this abrupt change, Miserly Wind, who had prepared to celebrate his plan's success, was dazed. However, Miserly Wind didn't know that Fierce Snake and his men had nearly as much combat power as peak experts because of their extraordinary basic attributes and physiques. Killing inferior players was a piece of cake. Fierce Snake and his team were even more efficient at hunting down and killing ordinary experts than true peak experts. How is this possible? How are they suddenly so strong? Miserly Wind was bewildered as he watched his guildmates fall, one after another, behind him. He didn't understand what was happening. Fierce Snake's team was superior to his in terms of combat methods, attack power, and movement speed. They fought like completely different people than they had in the earlier battle. As Miracle's members drew nearer, Miserly Wind thought of a possibility. Could it be? Have they been using us as bait to lure Miracle's members all this time? Chapter 1963, The Might of the Magic-Breaking Crossbows. Miserly Wind shuddered as he considered the possibility. He had never thought that Zero Wing was crazy enough to face Miracle head-on. But with another glance at the enemy players, he couldn't care less whether or not he and his team had been bait. All Miserly Wind could think of was escaping. At his level, he'd need several days of hard work to recover from a single death. Moreover, he wore higher quality weapons and equipment than the guild's other experts. If he lost one of his items, who knew how long it would take to find a replacement? Miracle's team was only 100 yards away now. As long as he met up with the approaching force, the fight would go on for some time, giving him the opportunity to get away, even if Miracle's army was no match for Fierce Snake and his monstrous players. As Miracle's forces drew closer, they spotted Eternal Undead's surviving members. Damn it! Zero Wing's team actually has the guts to kill our allies right before our eyes. Miracle's members wore sour expressions as they watched Eternal Undead's players die. They immediately increased their speed. Finally, once Miracle's members were within his attack range, Fierce Snake used Charge, reaching the enemy MTs instantly. He tightened his grip on his battle axe and swept the weapon in a horizontal arc. Tier 2 skill Blade Storm. With Fierce Snake as the center, a powerful storm brewed, enveloping a 20-yard radius and sending over a dozen MTs airborne. The attack interrupted Miracle's offensive charge on the spot. Zero Wing's other Tier 2 experts joined the fray without hesitation. Like a sharpened blade, they pierced Miracle's formation, diving for the team's core. With their advantage in basic attributes and physique, Miracle's 1,000-man team had no hope of stopping their advance. Only Miracle's Tier 2 experts were able to put up a fight, although barely. Zero Wing slaughtered their Tier 1 experts with very little effort. Meanwhile, Zero Wing's Tier 2 ranged players bombarded Miracle's rear line, preventing the enemy DPS from providing their comrades any support. After a brief moment, Zero Wing's 200-man team gained the upper hand. Although Miracle's team was not as easy to defeat as Eternal Undead's, it didn't fare much better. As for the Miracle team that had charged for Shifeng's 800-man party, Shifeng waved a hand and cast Flame Domain once it was within 50 yards and prepared to attack. At the same time, Zhao Yueru cast Frost Flame Hell. Two towering pillars of fire enveloped Miracle's members. The players caught within the AoE turned to ash instantly, vanishing from the battlefield. This Miracle team suffered a far more tragic fate than the one facing Fierce Snake's party. How is this? Miserly Wind slid to a halt, staring at the flaming pillars with a stupid expression. A single round of attacks had wiped out nearly half of Miracle's 1,000-man team. If they hadn't spread out, the two spells would have had no trouble eliminating the majority of Miracle's force. Miserly Wind felt as if Eternal Undead's desperate fight against Zero Wing had been little more than a warm-up for his adversaries. As everyone was in shock over witnessing the power of the two large-scale destruction spells. Crossbow unit, get ready, Shifeng shouted. He then pointed at the remaining Miracle members and commanded, fire. Immediately, the 60 Tier 1 Rangers at the front of the team released the Magic-Breaking Crossbows bolts. Shio, shio, shio. The Magic-Breaking Crossbows had an attack range of 70 yards, even longer than that of Tier 2 Rangers. At this point, the entirety of Miracle's force was within range. When the 60 Magic-Breaking bolts were released, they flew through the air so fast that even Tier 2 assassins would have trouble dodging them. Furthermore, Miracle's members were still in shock. The Magic-Breaking Crossbows instantly claimed 60 Miracle lives. The rest of the force only returned to their senses after watching their allies die beside them. When Miracle's members realized that even Tier 2 experts had fallen, a chilling thought crept into their minds. The moment after the first bolts found their marks, the Magic-Breaking Crossbows launched a second volley. Although many of Miracle's members had noticed the attacks, the magic-breaking bolts were just too fast. Miracle's Tier 1 players had no hope of dodging the attacks and died instantly. Only the Force's Tier 2 players had managed to evade the incoming bolts. After 2 volleys, Miracle's 1,000-man team had lost more than 100 players. The 60 magic-breaking crossbows ended their lives even faster than Fierce Snake and his friends. Retreat. Everyone retreat. The Tier 2 player leading the assault on Shifeng's 800-man team shouted, fear gripping his heart as he gazed at the corpse pinned to the ground beside him. The 60 magic-breaking crossbows were far more frightening than the earlier large-scale destruction spells. The spells had long cooldowns and couldn't be used once the 2 forces met in melee combat, but the crossbows' cooldowns were quite short and easily landed attacks in close quarters. Most importantly, the crossbows could kill a player with full HP in a single attack, and not even the Tier 2 MTs were an exception. How were they supposed to fight such a weapon? After issuing the command to retreat, Miserly Wind, who rested a long distance away, was dumbfounded. He had thought that Miracle would last against Zero Wing, but the fight that he had just witnessed couldn't even be called a battle. It had been a one-sided massacre. Although Miracle's leader had ordered a retreat, even he, a Tier 2 refinement realm expert, had died after becoming a target for more than 10 magic-breaking crossbows. The leader hadn't been able to resist as Zero Wing turned him into a human pincushion. These magic-breaking crossbows are amazing. Gentle Snow watched Zero Wing devastate the remnants of Miracle's 1,000-man team with wide, shocked eyes. She had recognized the Tier 2 team leader as a refinement realm expert, yet he had fallen after taking 10 or so magic-breaking bolts. The magic-breaking crossbow was truly an amazing weapon in a frontal confrontation. Now she, more or less, realized why Shifeng had dared to take so few players to Ice Jade Forest. Although the magic-breaking crossbow was a consumable, it could fire 300 magic-breaking bolts, which had been formed with mana before breaking. With the 60 magic-breaking crossbows they had enough firepower to survive a large-scale battle involving tens of thousands of players. Although more than 100,000 enemies resided in the Ice Jade Forest, less than 30,000 were from Miracle. As long as they picked their fights carefully and only took on several thousand Miracle members at a time, they could end Miracle's tyranny in this map. Meanwhile, Fierce Snake and his companions chased down Miracle's fleeing members on the other side of the battlefield. Although Miracle's members desperately fled, Zero Wing's Tier 2 players held an absolute advantage in terms of speed. Miracle's members didn't get far before they died. Aside from a few players that had used instantaneous movement magic scrolls, none escaped death. How'd it go? Shifeng asked Fierce Snake as he watched the rest of the team loot the battlefield. Unfortunately, a dozen or so got away, but we haven't had any casualties, Fierce Snake reported. Good. Publish the video of the battle with Eternal Undead and Miracle on the official forums. Let's show the other guilds that if they want to kick us while we're down, Miracle won't be able to protect them. Shifeng said. Understood. Fierce Snake nodded. Chapter 1964, Black Dragon Empire Shaken. The war between Miracle and Zero Wing was no longer a secret in the Black Dragon Empire. Almost every player in the Empire knew about it, and everyone had assumed that Zero Wing was doomed. Until now, no large guild in God's domain had survived a serious confrontation with a superpower. All of the lesser guilds had fallen in a short time, and Miracle had already placed a bounty on Zero Wing's experts in upper echelons. The offer was high enough to tempt many of the Empire's experts, and countless players had secretly taken action. Miracle had even recruited the Black Dragon Empire's various large guilds in its war with Zero Wing, and despite the public provocations on the forums each day, the guild hadn't responded and Zero Wing's reputation in the Empire had plummeted. At this point, many of Zero Wing's members had considered withdrawing from the guild. After all, players joined guilds to ease the burden of leveling up and share in the guild's glory. Nobody would join a cowardly guild that the public ridiculed. Meanwhile, the Empire's various large guilds spent their time preparing. The moment Zero Wing withdrew from the Black Dragon Empire, they would swoop in to take over its abandoned territories. However, an uproar shook the forum shortly after Fierce Snake uploaded the battle videos he and his teammates had recorded. The forum post's title was particularly eye-catching. Death to those who support Miracle. He had published the post under Zero Wing's name, and the imposing response was hard to ignore. Less than a minute after the post went live, it had become the most popular of the day with over 1 million views. Amazing. Zero Wing is simply amazing. Eternal Undead's members died right in front of Miracle's members, yet Miracle couldn't do anything about it. I wonder how the various large guilds feel now. Zero Wing is obviously showing them that even if they have Miracle's support, the guild can't protect them. Zero Wing is so arrogant. It's just one guild. Does Zero Wing really think it can survive if so many guilds band together? This warning will only enrage its enemies and make Zero Wing's situation worse. That might not be the case. Did you see how Eternal Undead's members died? They were fish on the chopping board in front of Zero Wing's team. Although Eternal Undead is only an average second-rate guild, it is still a bona fide second-rate guild, yet Zero Wing slaughtered its members. The other guilds will only suffer the same fate. That's right, this 1,000-man team from Zero Wing is simply ferocious. It almost annihilated Miracle's 2,000-man army. If such a team targets other guilds' expert teams, the outcome will likely be the same. Zero Wing is really a guild of experts. I think I'll stick with joining Zero Wing. The Empire's players had a heated discussion over the battle videos Fierce Snake had published. They had never thought that the moment Zero Wing took action, the guild would make such a terrifying move. With a single battle, it had deterred other guilds from trying to take advantage of the war and humiliated Miracle. Zero Wing hadn't suffered a single casualty in this latest battle, while Eternal Undead and Miracle's teams had been almost extinguished. Despite the two guilds having 5 times as many players, their defeat had still been miserable. This proved to everyone in the Empire that Zero Wing's strength wasn't superficial. When Zero Wing's members saw the post, however, their passion and enthusiasm rekindled. They all wished they had taken part in the battle and given Miracle a good beating. At the same time, many Zero Wing members aspired to become expert members more than ever. They hoped that they could one day fight overwhelming odds, securing an absolute victory like Fierce Snake and the others. Just the idea was exhilarating. Let's see if those guilds dare to act so arrogantly before us again. All hail Zero Wing. All hail the guild leader. When the various superpowers' upper echelons received news of the battle, an indescribable shock overwhelmed them. The battle's outcome had a greater impact on them than it had on the general public. Ordinary players might not be able to determine Fierce Snake and his team's exact strength, but they could. How has Zero Wing secured so many experts with the combat power to rival peak experts? Yuan Chexin read the latest report with furrowed brows. Peak experts were a guild's core combatants. Not even the various superpowers had many peak experts, yet Zero Wing had just revealed a force of 200 seemingly out of nowhere. A team of 200 peak experts would be an absolute nightmare out in the fields. Destroying such a force would require an army of tens of thousands of elite and expert players as well the use of magic arrays. Miracle likely has quite the headache over this situation right now. It had probably never considered that the little bug it was trying to crush would turn out to be a steel spike, Purple Jade said, giggling. Miracle had always been overbearing. Normally, even super guilds avoided clashing with the guild, whereas super first-rate guilds were often oppressed by it. However, she also had to admit that Miracle had the strength to do so. Seeing the guild suffer such devastating, repeated losses was extremely rare. Meanwhile, in Miracle's residence in Lake Heart City, the room's atmosphere was intensely chilly. Many of the Empire's large guilds had given up on provoking Zero Wing due to its recent demonstration. After all, the guild had proven that Miracle couldn't guarantee their safety in the fields. No matter how one looked at it, letting a large number of guild experts die just to grind in a better resource map wasn't worthwhile. Damn it! How did Zero Wing suddenly obtain so many experts? 1,000 Miles paled as he watched the battle video before him. I thought Zero Wing could only produce a small number of those basic combat devices. After Fierce Snake's team had displayed their strength at Blue Wave Rock, Miracle had sent spies to investigate the source of their power. With Zero Wing's current standards, gaining so many peak experts so quickly was impossible. The only explanation was that the guild had acquired a special tool. Based on those investigations, they had learned that Fierce Snake and his companions had become so powerful through a tool known as the Basic Combat Device. However, while this tool was very powerful, it had a limited duration, and only a small number could be crafted each day. At most, Zero Wing could supply a 100-man team for a full day. Fortunately, once these players scattered across the Empire, they'd no longer pose much of a threat. But Zero Wing had revealed 200 of these experts in the latest confrontation. 1,000 Miles could not figure out how Zero Wing had managed to craft so many more basic combat devices. If Zero Wing could truly maintain a 200-man team of these experts at all times, it would impact the current war's status quo. Moreover, they had discovered that Zero Wing had a powerful collection of heavy crossbows during the battle. Not only did the crossbows' attacks contain immense strength, but they were also impressively fast. If 10 or so magic-breaking crossbows attacked together, even a Tier 2 Refinement Realm expert would fall without the use of an invulnerability skill. Vice Guild Leader shredded, "Should we dispatch our peak experts to reinforce the Ice Jade Forest?" Miracle Dragon asked as he turned to Shredded Soul. "Forget it. Order a retreat," Shredded Soul said, shaking his head. "Retreat?" Confused, Thousand Miles asked, "Are we just letting Zero Wing off the hook? Do you plan to order our forces to continue the fight?" Shredded Soul glared at Thousand Miles. Coldly he continued, "Zero Wing has proven that it has the strength to fight us toe-to-toe in the Black Dragon Empire. We might win if we continue fighting, but we'll pay a heavy price and fulfill the other superpower's long-held wish. If we have to pay such a price for defeating Zero Wing in the Empire, what will we gain? How would we have lost so many elite and expert players if not for your stupidity? Had you investigated Zero Wing properly before taking action, I wouldn't have had to come here and clean up your mess. I'll deliver a report to the guild leader personally, so I suggest you cool down in the meantime." Shredded Soul's reprimand left Thousand Miles speechless, but he still felt wronged. Who would have thought that an up-and-coming guild like Zero Wing, which wasn't backed by any corporation, was so powerful? "I will return to the Western continent. I'll leave the cleanup to you," Shredded Soul added as he stared at Thousand Miles. He then used a guild transfer scroll and vanished from the meeting room. Chapter 1965, Quasi-super-first-rate Guild. Black Dragon Empire, Ice Jade Forest. Despite Thousand Miles' reluctance, he had no choice but to follow Shredded Soul's command and recall the guild members from the Ice Jade Forest. Meanwhile, Miracle's retreat caused a sensation throughout the Black Dragon Empire. What's going on? Miracle's retreating? That's not possible, right? Miracle is a super first-rate guild, yet it's actually giving up on Zero Wing? The sudden turn of events stupefied the Empire's players. They simply could not figure out what had caused Miracle to turn away from Zero Wing so abruptly. The two guilds had only engaged in a single battle involving several thousand players. To both, such a small battle wasn't even a warm-up. Thus far, all of Miracle's actions had displayed its intention to annihilate Zero Wing's branch guild in the Black Dragon Empire, yet they had fled from their prey. It was as if everything had just been an act. How disappointing. Miracle retreated after such a minor battle. And here I thought it was some amazing guild. In the end, it is no different than the Empire's other guilds. All hail Zero Wing. Even Miracle can't take down Zero Wing. Varied opinions of Miracle's withdrawal split the Empire's players. Some players felt that Miracle didn't deserve its title as a super first-rate guild since it couldn't even take out a non-superpower like Zero Wing, and others assumed Miracle had given up because Zero Wing truly was powerful. That cowardly Shredded Soul. He hasn't even started the war, yet he's already given up. I even ensured that he had all the information he needed. Nine Dragons Emperor slammed his fist into his desk when he read the report on Miracle's withdrawal from the Black Dragon Empire. He had hoped to use Miracle to wound Zero Wing. He had never expected the superpower to pack up and leave so soon. Meanwhile, in one of Lake Heart City's high-class restaurants. "Uncle Yuan, look. Shredded Soul has returned to the Western continent to take charge of things there. By the looks of it, he's really given up on Zero Wing," Purple Jade exclaimed, surprised. She had investigated Shredded Soul personally and had concluded that the man was truly ruthless. Once he set out to do something, he never gave up, yet he had decisively pulled his forces away from the conflict with Zero Wing. This was unbelievable. It's not that unusual. After all, there is no benefit in continuing the war with Zero Wing. At most, Miracle will restore some of its damaged reputation. With 200 experts that possess the combat power to rival peak experts in those heavy crossbows, Zero Wing qualified to contend with a superpower. Unless Miracle decides to go all out, it'll be helpless against the smaller guild. Moreover, Miracle is fighting a remote war. It already has to expend a lot of resources to engage in this war. Miracle's position will only become more of a disadvantage as the war drags on, Yuan Tiexin said, chuckling. Taking a sip from the cup of icy blue wine in his hand, he continued, At the end of the day, Miracle is a massive organization set out to make money. There's no way it would abandon everything it has built for its reputation. Since Zero Wing has proven that it has the strength to protect itself for some time, and the other superpowers know Miracle's strength, Miracle has no reason to continue fighting. That makes sense. Purple Jade nodded. However, Zero Wing is pretty impressive. It always has a surprise up its sleeve. I had thought the guild was doomed this time. I hadn't expected it to reveal such a trump card. It's no wonder why Zero Wing dared to compete with the various superpowers over your Empire's resources. In God's domain, Mai was right. Provoking Miracle wasn't a problem as long as Zero Wing could endure the larger guild's wrath. If Zero Wing couldn't do that, Miracle would destroy the guild. If it could, it would survive. It was just that simple. The various superpowers would not ridicule Miracle for being weak because it failed to destroy a guild that merely rivaled first-rate guilds. They would only take joy in the fact that Miracle had accidentally tugged on a tiger's tail. However, it's too early for Zero Wing to celebrate. The guild still has a bumpy road ahead. Furthermore, Miracle will definitely strike if given the chance in the future, Yuan Tiexin said. Miracle had only given up on dealing with Zero Wing this time because the losses outweighed the gains. Even if it defeated Zero Wing, all it would gain was reputation. While reputation was important for a guild's development, it was not particularly important to a veteran super-first-rate guild like Miracle. However, it was a different story for the various superpowers operating in the Empire. These superpowers were there to obtain resources for their development. It was entirely possible for these organizations to use everything they had to remove Zero Wing. They wouldn't give up as easily as Miracle. Now that Zero Wing had exposed 2 more trump cards, its development in the Empire would be at risk. While Yuan Tiexin and Purple Jade conversed, the various superpowers expressed their astonishment over Zero Wing's performance. They had never dreamed that a guild with no background was capable of forging such a sturdy foundation. They all ordered further investigations on Zero Wing, desperate to know more about the basic combat devices and magic-breaking crossbows. Due to this latest battle, the various superpowers realized that while guild experts were important, God's domain's tools were just as crucial. Zero Wing's success in fending off Miracle was the best proof of this. The Black Dragon Empire's large guilds in particular, feared for their survival after watching Zero Wing slaughter Eternal Undead's 3,000-man force. When they heard that Miracle had withdrawn its players from the war, they immediately recalled their forces from the Ice Jade Forest and reached out to butter up to Zero Wing. If even a super-first-rate guild like Miracle was powerless against Zero Wing, what hope did their guilds have? Zero Wing had proven its strength to everyone in the Black Dragon Empire with the battle in the Ice Jade Forest. Although it was not a super-first-rate guild, it had the power to stand against one. Zero Wing was now only second to the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion in the hearts of the Empire's players. To be precise, the Black Dragon Empire's general populace recognized Zero Wing as a Quasi-super-first-rate guild and that it was only a matter of time before it became a true super-first-rate guild. Meanwhile, the various large guilds that had previously provoked Zero Wing or taken delight in the guild's misfortune were now quite nervous, especially the guilds that had openly antagonized Zero Wing. These guilds were terrified that Zero Wing would seek retribution. With Zero Wing's strength, it would have no trouble removing their guilds from the Black Dragon Empire. All it would need was time and resources. Guild leader, more than a dozen guilds are trying to cozy up to us. Each guild is offering magic crystals and rare materials as compensation. Should we meet with their representatives? Gentle Snow asked Shurfeng. Before she had time to recover from her shock over Miracle's abrupt retreat, a large number of guilds had contacted her, wanting to repair their relationship with Zero Wing. They were even willing to make reparations. She hadn't expected this development. Chapter 1966, Overnight Fortune. Compensation? Shurfeng chuckled at Gentle Snow's report. These guilds sure reacted quickly. Now that Zero Wing's strength had been recognized, it was the perfect time to develop its influence in the Black Dragon Empire. However, since Zero Wing's development was currently limited by its resources, it had to claim other guilds' resources. Fortunately, quite a few of the Empire's guilds had openly provoked Zero Wing, so it was well within its rights to eliminate these guilds and take over their resources. No one would reprimand Zero Wing for doing so. Naturally, these offending guilds had considered the possibility of such an outcome. Although Zero Wing could only take on a few guilds at a time, on the off chance that they were one of the unlucky few, they'd be doomed. Hence, the various guilds that had provoked Zero Wing tried desperately to repair their relationships with Zero Wing. Should I call in their representatives, then? Gentle Snow understood the meaning behind Shifeng's comment. While Zero Wing's reputation had improved, it would take some time to develop the guild's strength. Moreover, doing so would require a lot of funds. Rather than waste resources on annihilating one or two large guilds, they needed to use this opportunity to claim compensation from the dozen or so guilds, making a fortune. This way, Zero Wing would gain both the money and the resources it needed for its development without lifting a finger. There's no need. Just tell them this. Second-rate guilds will compensate Zero Wing with 30,000 magic crystals and 50,000 gold in rare materials or lands in major NPC cities. Zero Wing requires 15,000 magic crystals and 30,000 gold in rare materials or lands from third-rate guilds. Shifeng said. If they don't pay up, they'll have to bear the consequences. While it seemed as though Zero Wing had easily defeated Miracle, Shifeng knew how close his guild had been to defeat. In God's domain, a war between guilds was a competition of capital and expert players. When a guild went to war, it had to spend money like there was no tomorrow. Meanwhile, Zero Wing's victory had been achieved through spending a massive number of magic crystals and resources. The magic-breaking crossbows were worth the price since they could be reused. They would only disappear after their uses had been depleted. However, the basic combat devices were different. Once they had been activated, they'd vanish after 12 hours. They could not be deactivated to save their remaining duration. Meanwhile, Shifeng had invested more than 80,000 magic crystals into crafting the two tools. The rest of the materials had also cost a ton of money. In addition, the guild had to compensate its members that had died in the fights. After fighting Miracle for just a few short days, Zero Wing's pockets were almost empty. Fortunately, Zero Wing had secured a manatite vein. Otherwise, the Black Dragon Empire's branch guild would have been finished. He was also fortunate that Miracle didn't know the tool's production costs. Had Miracle known about the expenditures, it would have continued this war. Hearing Shifeng's demands, Gentle Snow asked worriedly, aren't these prices a little too high? Currently, the average second-rate guild only occupied a few NPC cities, while the more powerful second-rate guilds occupied a dozen or so. These guilds' range of influence wasn't particularly vast. While 50,000 gold in resources or land was bearable for a second-rate guild, 30,000 magic crystals definitely weren't. At this stage of the game, 30,000 magic crystals were roughly half of a second-rate guild stockpile. Although it had become much easier to acquire magic crystals, players also needed to consume more of them, especially after the return of the Survivors expansion pack had been implemented. It's fine. Just inform them, Shifeng said, chuckling. While losing half of the guild's magic crystal stockpile was a significant cost, it would not impede the guild's normal operations. It would simply force the guild into stagnation for a short time. Moreover, he urgently needed magic crystals right now. He couldn't afford to be courteous with these guilds. Following which, Gentle Snow conveyed Shifeng's price to the various large guilds. When they received Zero Wing's demands, all of these guilds went into an uproar. The rare materials weren't an issue since every guild had an extraordinary stock of resources by now, but magic crystals were crucial to a guild's development. Damn Zero Wing. It might as well rob us at this point. Guild leader, what should we do? Pay the guild. We can't afford to stand out right now. Although Miracle failed to destroy Zero Wing, Blackwater and Beast Emperor have still been eyeing the guild in the Ur Empire. They won't let Zero Wing off the hook as easily as Miracle has. The various large guilds were enraged when they received Gentle Snow's message. They had barely claimed any resources in the high-resource maps Miracle had given them, yet they were now required to pay such expensive compensation. Their partnership with Miracle had been an utter mistake. However, due to the threat Zero Wing posed, they had no choice but to grit their teeth and swallow the loss. Within 3 hours after receiving Gentle Snow's message, the various large guilds sent their representatives to deliver the requested resources to Zero Wing's residence in Lakeheart City. When Gentle Snow and the guild's other upper echelons received the payments, they were ecstatic. Snow. We're rich. Zhao Yueru exclaimed as she gazed at the magic crystals and multiple resources in the guild warehouse. They had received compensation from more than a dozen guilds. Among the guilds that had paid their dues, 5 were second-rate guilds and 8 were third-rate guilds. In total, Zero Wing had received 270,000 magic crystals, a considerable amount even to the current superpowers. Furthermore, Zero Wing had gained 490,000 gold in rare materials and lands. Not only had Zero Wing earned back the resources it had spent in the war, but it had also made a huge profit. With this many resources, Zero Wing could afford to recruit tens of thousands of members in the Black Dragon Empire. It could also strengthen Hidden Fog Town's defenses and upgrade it to intermediate rank. I had expected it to take a few more days to collect 200,000 magic crystals, but I guess I don't have to worry about the deadline anymore. Shi Feng was just as excited to see the miniature mountain of magic crystals. He didn't dare to take risks with the inferior legendary quest from the Jealous Witch. The penalty for failing the quest was no laughing matter. Moreover, he absolutely needed the field magic array Void Field. Field magic arrays were extremely rare in God's domain, and the only one he knew how to obtain was the one in the Witch's Hill. He'd just have to get lucky to secure another one. Field magic arrays were so rare because of how powerful advanced field magic arrays were in wars and when plundering resources. Once players reached level 65 and beyond, resources would become significantly more difficult to acquire due to how dangerous the monsters were in the appropriately leveled maps. Although these monsters had higher basic attributes, they also have visibly stronger combat standards once they reached level 65 and beyond. Moreover, the more resource-rich a map was, the more visible this improvement would be. In comparison, monsters below level 60 had roughly the same combat standards regardless of what kind of map they occupied. At most, their basic attributes would differ slightly. The weakest monsters in level 65+ maps had combat standards on par with the early stage of the Trial Tower's 3rd floor, while the stronger monsters could reach the 5th floor's early stage. Most importantly, they would travel in larger numbers. Against such an abrupt difference, one could imagine how the various large guilds would fare. Moreover, guild experts had obviously lower basic attributes than monsters. If these guild experts lost their combat standard advantage as well, they'd have a difficult time grinding. Because of this, few large guilds had taken advantage of level 65+ maps in his previous life since they weren't strong enough to grind the map's monsters. Hence, field magic arrays had become extremely important. A field magic array would provide a significant advantage over other guilds when guild members left to level up or grind for resources. And Void Field was an advanced field magic array. Now that I've settled matters in the Black Dragon Empire, it's time to revisit the Witch's Hill. When Shi Feng saw that the branch guild's development was back on track, he took 200,000 magic crystals with him and teleported back to Zero Wing City. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.